Release that witch eye by Ermu. Chapter 441, Storm Clouds. It was a secret room of the Tower of Babel in the Hermes Cathedral. Tayfun stared at the witch across him and couldn't help but sigh. Is His Holiness Main really so busy? Of course he is. The witch stroked her golden curls. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent me to meet you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Isabella, and I'm a pure witch of the Supreme Pontiff. Your Excellency Tayfun, the other two newly appointed bishops, Soli Dal of the Judgment Army and El of the Tribunal, stared at each other. Although they knew about the church's secret witches, they never expected them to be allowed to participate in such important meetings. She's a direct subordinate of the Pope with the same rank as a bishop, she just doesn't have an official position in the church, explained Tayfun with a sigh. Bishops can also have their own pure witches, so when the months of the demons are over, you too can choose a few witches to raise. I see. Soli widened his eyes. So what kind of powers do they have? This is highly confidential, and only the Supreme Pontiff knows about it. Why would we want to raise witches? El seemed quite annoyed. If the believers find out, the church's reputation will be terribly damaged. Of course, they can help you take care of shady business. Isabella raised her eyebrows. Also, they can sleep with you, let you vent your anger, or do many other things. You should know that witches are completely different from regular women. Absurd. Ahem, that's enough. Tayfun coughed. Your Excellency L, I already said that the Pope's pure witches are of equal rank as bishops and should be seen as his representatives, so you should show them some respect. And Lady Isabella, please refrain from making these jokes. They aren't as old and near death as me, and might get very angry at what you said. As you wish, Your Excellency, Isabella said with a smile. Fel uttered a nasal sound and ignored the witch. Then let's get to business, Tayfun said, stroking his beard. Do you have anything to report? I don't understand why His Holiness Main is suddenly asking all of the local church groups to send their captured witches to the Holy City. Even if it's to create God's punishment army, it's still a high price to pay. El took the lead and said. Her tone sounded harsh, probably because of her anger towards the pure witch. Ever since the order was passed, we've captured 3 witches. While they were being sent over, one broke out of her cage and killed the accompanying guards, and we have yet to find her. Wasn't she restrained by a metal leash? Asked Soli. Not all churches are equipped with the most advanced God's locket of retribution, said El annoyedly. We lost 16 believers to this witch, including 4 who were supposed to become judgment warriors. If something like this happens again, people might be too afraid to capture witches. But we all know that combat witches are a minority, and most of the fallen aren't capable of fighting back, so this kind of issue is very rare, said Isabella nonchalantly. Also, every time you bring back a wild witch, the church can gain 2 new God's punishment warriors, so I shouldn't have to explain to you which is more important. I agree with Lady Isabella, Soli said, nodding his head. With the stress on Hermes' line of defense increasing every day, we desperately need more God's punishment warriors to fight the demonic beasts. One God's punishment warrior has the fighting ability of 3 or 4 judgment warriors, and even more warriors in training. Since the Supreme Pontiff has made his decision, we should just carry it out to the best of our ability. Tayfun turned to Soli Dal and asked, what's the situation at our line of defense? Very difficult. Regular demonic hybrids are easy to deal with, but every time a fearful beast of hell appears, a God's punishment warrior gets injured or killed. Soli shook his head. Burying snow powder and detonating it is a good idea, but we can't guarantee that they walk over the snow powder every time. His Holiness has also considered this, said Isabella frankly, and he plans to use the siege beast ahead of time. What's that? A siege weapon controlled by pure witches with a range, accuracy, and power that far exceed those of the mangonel, and the key to conquering the kingdom of Wolfheart, explained the pure witch. The siege beast was originally used to fight demons and giant demonic beasts, so since the fearful beasts of hell showed up early, we should start using it. Why didn't we use it from the beginning? Soli asked confusedly. Because of the potential damage. Isabella shrugged. We can't build new ones and can only repair parts of it. So where did it come from? Elle asked with a frown. This is top secret, so you don't have the clearance to know. You. As the secret room fell quiet, Taifun broke the silence by clapping his hands and saying, All right, since you all brought bad news, I shall share a piece of good news. Besides a few cities in the kingdom of Wolfheart that are still resisting, all the other nobles have pledged their allegiance to us, just like the weaklings in the kingdom of Everwinter did. There'll be more believers joining the church, and by next summer, the holy city's resources and judgment army will double in size. Also, the kingdom of Dawn caused an uprising because of its hostility against believers, and our people are secretly helping them fight the noble, which might last until the end of the months of the demons. Finally, some good news. Elle sighed. I thought the church was done for. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Soli glared at her. Aren't we progressing exactly according to our plan? Good job. Isabella nodded approvingly and glanced at the three bishops. Since you're all done talking, I'll share the Supreme Pontiff's new order. The three archbishops all immediately looked at the pure witch. His Holiness orders that we adjust next year's attacks by targeting the kingdom of Greycastle first and the kingdom of Dawn last. What? Solidal was stunned. But all of our strategies were made in accordance with the kingdom of Dawn, including our resources and reinforcements, so if we change our plan now, we'll have to delay our date of the attack. Wasn't this plan already in place when Pope O'Brien was in power? Why are we changing it now? Elle asked curiously. Both kingdoms will fall eventually, so why does the order of attacks matter? Taifun was silent. When His Holiness Maine ordered him to send pure witches to the kingdom of Greycastle to plot the western region, he had already predicted this change. His Holiness wasn't interested in King's City, but in the border area of the kingdom of Greycastle. After the two men stopped bickering, Taifun said quietly, I've nothing against the order itself, but there's a lot at stake, and I want to see His Holiness Maine before we carry it out. Can you pass the message for me? No need for such trouble. Isabella smiled. It just so happens that His Holiness wants to see you too. Chapter 442, The Approval of God. As he walked down the stairs to the bottom of the church, Taifun felt an inexplicable chill. In the eerily quiet church basement was the core secret of the church, the Hermes underground castle. It was the first time for him to come to this place. His Holiness Maine really wanted to meet me here? According to the convention, only the archbishop who was in line as the pope was allowed into the secret area, but he was too old to be Maine's successor. You've served the church for so many years and have worked together with His Holiness, so he trusts you deeply, Isabella said with a smile. Also, past rules don't apply to war times like these, and God's will shouldn't be hidden underground but used to guide the lost believers and lead us to face our final challenge. Is this His Holiness's idea? That's right, she said gently. When they entered the secret area, they were greeted by two judgment warriors. Milord Bishop, His Holiness is currently testing magic stones, so if you are carrying a god stone of retaliation, please give it to me for now, it might affect the stone's magic power. Taifun nodded and handed a string of stones to the judgment warrior. His Holiness is right here, please follow me. Isabella turned into a long passageway and pushed open the metal door at the end. Following the screech of the hinges, Taifun saw another masked pure witch. She blocked the doorway like a ghost, her white skin peeking through the black silk covering her body, and she wore nothing else besides the chiffon. The most striking thing about the witch was her dull gray eyes that were different from those of ordinary people. They seemed to have whirlpools inside them that sucked him in if he looked for too long. Taifun subconsciously lowered his head. It was only then that he noticed that she was barefoot and her toes were covered with flecks of red. The archbishop recalled Isabella's sentence that witches are completely different from regular women. Damn it, are all these witches demon spirits? Those delicate feet soon moved out of the way, and Taifun heard Isabella's voice. Milord? Ahem. Taifun broke out of his thoughts and walked into the room. The room was not big, and even though the rosin torches on the walls were burning brightly, they didn't give off their usual sweet smell. 4 pure witches sat around a stone table and were fiddling with a clear stone, while the incumbent pope, His Holiness Maine, stood by the table. Tayfun was about to kneel in respect, when Maine grasped his arm and stopped him. "There aren't any outsiders here, so there's no use for all this red tape." He smiled. "We go way back, my Lord Tayfun." In 2 months, Maine's forehead had become much more wrinkled, and he had grown a few more strands of silver hair, but his humble tone was still the same. "You can't do this." Tayfun's heart suddenly felt warm. "Even if there aren't other believers here, I still have to follow the church's rules. And I make the rules." The Pope smiled nonchalantly. "Anyway, are things all right above ground? I originally wanted Isabella to bring me the news, but since you're here, you can report directly to me." "Yes, Your Holiness." Tayfun nodded. After he shared the recent state of the church, he mentioned the order that Isabella had brought up earlier. "All of the resources we prepared up until now are specific to the Kingdom of Dawn, so adjusting our target will take a lot of effort." "Why do you suddenly want to attack the Kingdom of Greycastle first?" "That's also why I called you here." Maine sighed. "The Kingdom of Greycastle is starting to show signs of decline because the royal decree on the selection of Crown Prince and Pill of Madness are achieving their expected results. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Dawn is in even more chaos, so both of them will eventually fall, and it doesn't really matter whom we attack first." "I agree, but Greycastle is still a formidable enemy." "I have 2 reasons for changing our plan of attack," said the Pope slowly, clasping his hands behind his back. "The first is basically the reason why you're worried. The Kingdom of Greycastle is vast and rich in resources, which means it's a high-risk, high-return opponent. If we can make it a territory of the Church earlier, our benefits will be much greater than if we conquer the Kingdom of Dawn. If I had 10 more years, I would definitely act according to Lord O'Brien's plan, but we don't have enough time. The appearance of the fearful beast of hell means that the bloody moon may appear even earlier than predicted in the Holy Book. In times like these, a little risk and more sacrifices will be worth it." Tayfun nodded slightly, thinking, this is a good reason, but the problem is, it doesn't seem Maine will do it in this way. He continued, "And the second reason is Roland Wimbledon of the Western region," the Pope said decisively. "You mean Prince Roland of the Kingdom of Greycastle?" Tayfun was shocked. "By combining the past year's reports, I've discovered something incredible." Maine patted the bishop's shoulder. "Both the Church and the Kingdom of Greycastle failed in all their attacks against him. The first failure can be traced back to the one when Duke of the Western region attacked him, and what did Roland have at the time? Nothing but a rundown small town. Outsiders think that he defeated the Duke's knightage by succumbing to the demons, but we all know that besides extraordinaries, a few witches have nothing against knights equipped with God's stones of retaliation. Also, the reports have only become more and more confusing, such as the secret letter sent to the Holy City 2 months ago, which stated that King Timothy once sent 2,000 crazed soldiers to attack the Western region and was immediately defeated. What does this mean?" Tayfun couldn't help but gasp. 2,000 crazed soldiers. Even in Hermes, this is a considerable force. If these messages are read separately, they might seem normal, but when combined, they're very shocking. "Roland Wimbledon has never lost a single battle," the Pope said quietly. "Also, our reports show that his power is growing at a concerning pace, and he seems to be preparing for expansion. If we delay for another year, the entire Kingdom of Greycastle may fall into his hands, so it'll be even more costly to try to defeat him." He paused and turned to Tayfun. "There are a lot of matters to be dealt with in the secret area, and I have no time for the operation and expansion of the upper levels of the Church, so I can only entrust them to you." After the Archbishop left, the appearance of the room suddenly changed. The torches on the wall, the pure witch who was studying the magic stones, and the stone table disappeared. The figure of the Pope also gradually faded, leaving only Isabella, Zero, and the woman in black. "If you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have known that Prince Roland of Kingdom of Greycastle was so interesting," said Isabella. Why do I get the feeling that he, rather than the church, is more likely to defeat the demons? What does that mean? Asked the woman in black, frowning. Do you want to betray the church? Betray? Don't phrase it like that. Isabella shrugged. Isn't the purpose of the church to ensure that human beings survive the battle of divine will? If someone else can do this, I don't care who I serve. You. Stop fighting, said Zero. Isabella isn't wrong. In the so-called battle of divine will, only the final winner can be protected by God. She looked expressionlessly at the two witches. As for who will receive the approval of God, the Union or a prince of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, I think this war will give us the answer. Chapter 443, The Conspiracy. Somewhere to the north of Longsong Stronghold, the western region of Kingdom of Grey Castle, Sir Eltek was sitting by the fireplace contemplating. They had not heard anything from Miso Eltek since he had left the night before. It was morning now, and he had yet to return. Sir Eltek felt a deep sense of unease. Recently, Miso had been very close with the major families in the western region. As the prince's agent in Stronghold, the Honeysuckle family had announced His Highness' intention to integrate the western region. All territories would adopt one law and the enfeoffment rights of the nobles would be taken back, which meant they could not expand their subordinate nobles or recruit knights to fight for them. As for lower nobles like the Elteks, they felt little influence and enjoyed many benefits. As the rumor went, anyone who was loyal to His Highness would be rewarded his favor. Right now, the less influential nobles were the safest people because they would determine the success or failure of His Highness' reform plan. Consequently, the smartest thing to do was wait and see. However, Miso Eltek hadn't shared that philosophy. My lord, the attendants looking for the second master have returned, said the steward, pushing open the door to the knight's study. Have they found him? No, the steward shook his head. They've searched the taverns, casinos, theaters, and brothels and still can't find him. Eltek was increasingly anxious. He had dispatched 2 companies of scouts to search for Miso. The first one went to the homes of lower nobility nearby. Most of these nobles were vassals in the employ of Duke Ryan and retained a status comparable to the Duke's family. Miso often went to these places for parties or dinners. The second group went to the entertainment venues, popular spots for young nobles. Seeing both parties return empty-handed, the knight's sense of dread intensified. He stepped to the window, looking toward the Eastern Territory. The territory of the Elk family lay in that direction. It was the largest earl domain in the western region. Since the collapse of Duke Ryan, Petrov from the Honeysuckle family had completely swung to Prince Roland and the Elk family had edged ahead to become the leading power against the prince. Hell, had Miso gone there? My lord, the second master has returned. Suddenly an attendant ran into the study, breathless. He's changing clothes in the hall, and it seems he is getting ready to go out. What? The knight immediately grasped his crutch and rushed downstairs, disregarding the steward's pleas for restraint. The moment Eltek stepped into the hall, he felt his anger rise to a new level. He saw Miso replace his thick coat with a thin and soft leather. The shiny armor of a knight was in front of him and 2 squires were doing their final preparation work. Where did you go yesterday? The old knight couldn't help shouting. What are you up to now? Father, our chance is coming, Miso said excitedly, a chance to be baron. Maybe even viscount. Eltek felt his blood pressure increasing. Who told you this? Jacques Med, he brought the king's confidential order. Eltek took 2 steps back, his heart sinking. Jacques Med was the eldest son of the Elk family. Never mind the involvement with Timothy. Everyone knew that Timothy wanted to eradicate Roland Wimbledon. His worst nightmare had occurred and now it was even more serious than he had anticipated. What did you hear? Lord Med summoned the nobility of the western region into his castle and opened His Majesty's holograph. It said that if someone conquers Longsong Stronghold, the king will promote his title and expand his domain. It seemed that Miso was still immersed in the grand scene. Lady Miller from the Wild Rose family, Lord Cavan from the Maple family and Lord Remy Noah from the Wolf family all pressed their fingerprints and pledged an oath of allegiance, without hesitation. The rest of the nobles and knights are determined to follow the four families and remove the Honeysuckle family. It was ridiculous. How could the four families make such a decision based on a piece of paper? The knight lamented inwardly. Had you forgotten how they had treated King Wimbledon III when Duke Ryan was guarding the western region? When had they become so loyal? The only answer was that this was a complete fraud to convince the lower nobles to become pioneers in the movement. The plan would commence in a few months and the four families might agree on the benefits after finding success. Eltek opened his mouth but didn't share his thoughts. This was Miso Eltek, not his eldest son Ferlin, and such dissuasion wouldn't convince him. "Where are you going in this armor?" the old knight asked after short silence. "To win honor and status." Miso wore a cuirass made of stainless steel. Morning Light, the top knight in the western region, only one honor for himself. "While I fight for my whole family. Father, when this is finished, you'll know that I'm as worthy of respect as my brother. If Timothy vanquishes Prince Roland, your words may come to pass. However, the army of the new king is still far away while Prince Roland's army is very near," the old knight thought. "Don't you remember how Duke Ryan collapsed?" Eltek said in a low voice. "Things are different this time. The king has shipped a number of snow powder weapons, the same ones used by Prince Roland. He'll provide better ones to Med. Without the possession of superior weapons, can Roland seize Longsong stronghold again?" Miso clipped his sword to his waist and nodded to his father. "The battle is coming soon. Please wait here for good news." Looking at his back, Eltek threw his crutch to the ground. "My lord, why didn't you stop him?" the steward came up to hold the trembling knight. "It would be easy to stop him, but the family would suffer a great calamity," he nodded slowly. A noble attending the rebellion meeting hadn't shown up at the agreed place. What did this mean for the four families? The crime of escape or defection could lead the whole Eltek family to death. "Look on the bright side, if the four families win," the steward comforted. "After all, the months of the demons are long and it'll take 2 or even 3 months for the snow to melt. When the army of Prince Roland arrives, the king's army may have already besieged the western region." If it were the past, he would view it in the same way. However, after having visited Border Town once, the knight had a totally different view of Prince Roland. Not to mention his eldest son Ferlin Eltek and his family's benefactor Lady Agatha were all living in Border Town. He turned to his steward and told him in a stern voice, "Go to Border Town immediately and deliver this news to His Highness. If the city gate has closed, go to the docks in the outskirts and find some ferrymen or fishermen. It doesn't matter how you do it, just do it quickly." Chapter 444, The Intelligence. Before the housekeeper left the Eltek territory, Roland received a letter from the Second Army of Stronghold delivered by a bird. An hour later, Petrov's call for help also reached the town's castle. Since the carrier pigeon could only carry limited information, Roland had to combine the two messages and discovered a piece of astonishing news. The four families of the western region had rebelled. Who on earth gave them the confidence to plot treason under my nose? Roland immediately summoned Carter and Iron Axe and showed them the notes. "Your Highness, is this a message from Stronghold?" Roland said angrily. The winter was drawing to an end, and the new year was in 3 days. Not only were there various matters concerning the city construction, but also the installation of the equipment for the 3 supplies project required his instruction. "Those nobles chose to trouble me at the wrong time, they must be looking forward to dying." According to the secret letter, the inner city nobles led a bunch of squires to attack the city guards. By the time the sentries on the city wall realized something was wrong, the switch for the northern drawbridge had fallen into the control of the enemies. The sentries could do nothing but light the beacon fire and rely on the city wall to hold their positions. When the other members of the Second Army saw the beacon signal, they followed the emergency response protocol by dividing the camp's 10 teams of about 50 soldiers in total into 2 platoons. One platoon charged toward the north gate, while the other went to the stronghold castle. Petrov's secret letter was sent after the second platoon confronted the enemies at the castle and realized they were fighting the local nobilities. Petrov mentioned that the attackers sieging the castle were carrying the four families' banners, which means this rebellion was planned. Carter frowned after reading the notes. Since the four families are acting together, there must be a leader among them. Indeed, the four families, or five families including those under Duke Ryan, were great nobles on equal footing. If they were to set aside their prejudices and cooperate, it was most likely because a bigger force was behind them. Otherwise, with the earls looking down upon each other, it would take over a decade for them to decide on a leader. At the moment, there were only one or two people who would be interested in meddling with the western region. Do you mean Timothy and the King's City? Iron Axe looked at the chief knight. As a member of the Irons and people of the Majin clan, he was far less sensitive to the political situation of the Kingdom of Grey Castle than Carter was. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the church. Roland twitched his mouth and said. Judging from their actions at Fallen Dragon Ridge, it's only a matter of time before they attack the western region. The problem is, in the second letter, Petrov mentioned the enemies might have firearms. Carter frowned. Does it mean they have learned the formula for gunpowder? Snow powder isn't unknown to the church and Timothy, but they have a long way to go before they can use it smoothly. The prince knocked on the table lightly. What puzzles me is that with Border Town as the nearest town to Stronghold, the help they get must be from somewhere further. So even with the support of an unknown force, how did they gain enough confidence to confront the First Army? Probably because we're in the months of the demons, Iron Axe replied after contemplating for a while. Although last time Your Highness defeated the Duke's Knights using thunder power, our troops didn't show extraordinary skills in battle. Now with the snow blocking the roads and demonic beasts attacking the borders, it seems like perfect timing for a successful rebellion, and it'll be at least 2 months before you have the resources to attack Longsong Stronghold. And I'll be hindered by the lofty city walls and powerful flintlocks? Yes, Iron Axe couldn't help but grin. They have all the weapons that you have, plus the insurmountable city wall and reinforcement of an unknown force, so they have a very good chance of beating you at the foot of the city wall. That's probably what they thought. Yet they're fully unaware of the power of Border Town. Roland stood up. Iron Axe. At your command, Your Highness. Iron Axe instantly stood at attention. The First Army must immediately prepare for an expedition. We'll set off tomorrow morning, Roland said decisively. Choose 500 soldiers. Carry 6 field artilleries. You are in charge of making the specific arrangements. Yes, sir. Iron Axe saluted. The scale of the First Army had quadrupled its original 500 soldiers to 2,200. Revolving rifles were upgraded, and their firepower was drastically increased. Besides, the efficiency of the First Army's executing instructions was greatly enhanced due to the improvement of the soldiers' educational level. Upon command, personnel would deploy ammunition and rations based on the number of soldiers on the operation and the number of days. The logistics work for 500 people could be done in almost 1 day. Compared with the knights or the mercenaries, who needed weeks to prepare, Roland's army was functioning at an incredible speed. The army headed towards the inner city of Stronghold on 11 paddle steamers. After entering mass production, the production of a boat with a reinforced concrete hull took only 5 days, which was even a deliberately lowered speed, because its number was limited by the available crew and steam engines. Carter. At your command, Your Highness, the chief knight said and raised his head high. You stay in Border Town. The corners of the knight's mouth instantly fell down. Well, what? No. Your Highness. How could you leave me behind again? We're still in the months of the demons. Demonic beasts pose a greater threat than the nobility, Roland said unwaveringly. Guard the town well. After the two of them retreated, Roland sighed. This time the witches need to go with me. I'll follow you, no matter where you go, Nightingale said with a smile. Considering their opponent could be the church, Roland knew that only the witches could effectively counter the pure witches' attacks without God's stones of retaliation. After debating his options, Roland decided on the witches who would accompany him: Lightning, Maggie, Sylvie, Nana, Lily, and Nightingale. If I add the 3 combat witches from Sleeping Island to the list, it'll be very hard for the pure witches to defeat us. Roland stood at the window and looked at the snowy mountains and plains. If I view the impassable mountain range as the city wall of Stronghold, then the barbarian land in the north is also the domain of the 4 families, a territory beyond the reach of my power. Elk, Wild Rose, Maple Leaf, and Wolf families have operated separately on their own lands for over a decade, forming their unique laws and customs, so even Ryan, the overlord of the western region, seldom interfered with their businesses, mused Roland. The prince had intended to slowly divide and annex these aristocratic territories after building the new city, but the rebellion gave him an early opportunity, one to swallow the vast land and population of Stronghold in one gulp. He didn't intend to let go of the nobles this time. Chapter 445, Attacks. Kakuzum arrived at the dock as the first rays of sunlight started to peep through the clouds. Unlike the usual, the dock was packed with silent soldiers. They stood erect, with their sacks and long-barreled guns on their backs, looking like a thick forest in a storm. Although the dock was crowded, everyone was moving in an organized manner. Watching the soldiers board the paddle steamer one by one, Kakuzum was filled with an indescribable sense of power and strength. He swallowed hard while thinking. These are the soldiers trained by His Highness. How incredible! The old man had traveled from Seawinshire to the port of Clearwater as a youth. This distance was over half the kingdom of Greycastle, and he had also led the commercial fleet to the fjords and nearby islands. So, he had personally witnessed the arrogant demeanor of the armored knights, as well as the fierce demeanor of the barbarians who killed beasts barehanded. To him, these soldiers were undeniable fighters that could exercise extreme power. However, he had not expected to feel that power once again, but while standing with the group of ordinary people he could feel it, and it was stronger than ever. No doubt these are just ordinary people, he thought. It had been about 4 months since Kakuzum arrived at Border Town, and each day he understood the town a little better. He knew that the First Army consisted mostly of locals and that many of them were miners, hunters, furnace laborers, and masons before they joined the army. Because of this, they had never received any professional combat training. Nevertheless, in just a few months, these people had become as brave and disciplined as any knight. What magic did His Highness use on them? Are you really going? Kakuzum heard Wade whisper from behind him. He could tell from his lowered voice that he too was silenced by the presence of the army. Why did I apply for the captain position if I wasn't going? Kakuzum answered while taking a deep breath. But they are off to fight. Wade continued. They all offer their services to His Highness. The old man corrected. Without turning his head he added, and so do I. Following the momentary silence, Wade then implored, stay alive. Kakuzum waved in response. Kakuzum boarded the 6th paddle steamer as it arrived with the swirling snow. According to the tradition, a captain can name their own ship, and even though this boat belonged to His Highness, he was still allowed to decide its name. Yet, he still had not made up his mind. This was the second time he had assumed the position of captain since his retirement 10 years ago. So, he wished to come up with a name dedicated to his memory. Captain, there you are. As soon as Kakuzum stepped into the cabin at the helm, the first mate came up to greet him. We are now preheating the boiler, and I promise it will soon be ready to go. The young man was called Pike and he was from the Southern Territory. He had a few years' experience fishing on the sea. If he was a part of another fleet, he wouldn't even pass as a sailor, but on this boat, everyone was a newbie. Everyone's here? All are on board. You were the last one, Pike replied with a wink. If you don't know how to respect your captain, I'll be happy to teach you through a full day of deck cleaning. Yes, Captain. The young man shouted, erecting himself immediately, of course I do. That's better, Kakuzum commented. While stroking his beard he gave Pike orders. Tell the boiler house to stoke up the fire, but not to shut the damn steam valve. I don't want to rear-end the boat in front of us. Yes, gotcha. Without finishing the sentence, Pike had slipped back into his previous playful manner. He quickly winked at the old man and dashed out of the cabin. "That rascal," Kakuzum mumbled while shaking his head smiling. He was more at ease after the interaction, as if he had slipped back to the good days of when he roamed the sea. The old man went back to the wheel, where he gently stroked its wooden handle. Slowly he began to remember the operating procedures for a paddle steamer. The stone boat invented by His Highness was very different from the sailboat. It didn't have a mast or a cabin below deck, instead, it had 2 chambers. The first chamber is located at the helm and is called the wheelhouse. This room has 2 large windows from which the captain can see the route and navigate clearly. The second chamber is found in the middle and it contains the boiler that powers the boat. Behind the wheelhouse, there was a bare deck and this space was often filled by miners during training. During this time of training, they would often travel west along the Redwater River to drop the miners off at the edge of the misty forest, where they could find coal. Coal lasted longer than wood and was the preferred fuel for seawindshare. Now, there was a makeshift shed constructed from cloth, apparently set up in preparation for the boarded soldiers. Although Kakuzum was not familiar with the stone boat, he soon realized it was not hard to operate and even simpler than a sailboat in many ways. First of all, this boat didn't require wind and sails for direction and power. Overall, it took less manpower to run. Furthermore, it would not be hard to teach a villager how to run a stove, whereas it would take at least 6 months for them to master sailing. The stone boat could run by itself for a long time as long as the engine was on and the steam valve was shut. Just then, the tranquility of border town's early morning was broken by a dull steam whistle from the front of the line. The first boat was sailing off. "Captain, the water in the boiler is ready," reported Pike, who scurried back to the wheelhouse. "Ring the bell to tell Big Pat and Grizzly that it is time to shut the valve and speed up. It's time to move." Kakuzum solemnly gave the instructions. "Yes, sir." "Advance." Pike pulled on the long iron string attached to the wall, which would ring the bell in the boiler house and deliver the captain's command. In response, the boat shook violently, and the wooden tires on either side started to move slowly. Kakuzum held tight to the wheel at the helm and looked straight ahead. When Vader asked him why he wanted to fight, he actually did not tell him the truth. Saying it was to serve His Highness was only a small part of the reason. The truth was he simply enjoyed being a captain. It didn't matter if it was a sailboat or a paddle steamer, Kakuzum truly loved the feel of the wheel in his hands as he navigated the bow through the thrusting waves. This is the life he really wants. Full sail. No, continue to shovel coal. The old man turned to face starboard while hollering. "Hold on, guys. We're setting out. If you ferry me to border town, the Elks will pay you well." "How about 5, no, 10 gold royals?" the steward asked while blocking the troubled boatman's cabin door. The steward had placed his left foot in the crack of the door to prevent the boatman from closing it in his face and effectively shutting him out. "Why? Your Excellency, I'm happy to be at your service, but I just can't." The boatman stammered, Look, there isn't even a shed above my boat to protect you from the snow. It wouldn't be a problem to ferry you across the river, but to border town, that would take several days. Just consider this freezing weather. Where would we sleep?" the boatman implored. "We would become frozen like popsicles in just one night on the boat, wouldn't we?" "Are there any other boatmen nearby who can ferry me to border town?" the steward persisted. "No, not a one," the boatman denied while waving his hand. "We only have small boats." "Why? You should go to Stronghold to find a boat you can spend the night on." "If I could have entered Longsong Stronghold, why did I come here looking for a boatman that fished and ferried for a living?" the steward thought to himself as the boatman shut the door. The steward kicked at the snow. Ever since the 4 families started to attack Stronghold, all the city gates had been closed. He spent a long time taking this detour and now found that all of his efforts were in vain. It will be getting dark soon. How am I going to complete my lord's task? The steward sullenly looked at the Redwater River, but he was soon stunned. Good heavens, what's that? He rubbed his eyes in disbelief, making sure what he was seeing was not an illusion. A huge fleet was coming down the river and the boats were unlike any he had seen before. Through the dense misty snow, the vessels roared and whistled towards him at full speed. There was not any sail on the grey boats and yet they were still proceeding against the wind, their bows cutting the water and cleaving through the waves. On the first boat, he could see a flag flapping in the wind with the embroidered emblem of a tower and a gun. The steward held his breath in realization, this is the fleet of Prince Roland Wimbledon. Chapter 446, Here Comes the Giant Beast. Longsong Stronghold was bisected by a branch of the Redwater River. To the west laid the residential area and to the east laid vast farming lands. Unlike the other big cities that were set in the suburbs of farmlands, the towering city wall of the stronghold encircled both the residential area and a portion of the farmlands. It was built to defend against human beings, and not demonic beasts. However, even if the city was under siege, Stronghold would still flourish and be able to supply its people. As such, the outer wall of Longsong Stronghold was split where the river divided the two sections of the city. Between the divide and the walls hung several massive chains which were the width of a man's arm. If an enemy decided to attack from the river, the hemp cords holding the heavy chains would be cut and send them crashing into the water to stop the enemy below. Fortunately, the inner land of the western region had rarely been attacked by any fleets. So, these cables had almost never come into use, and would not this time either. Out on the water, Roland's fleet pushed through the storm. Around twilight, they were able to see the silhouette of the fortress in the distance. Strands of the beacon's fire could be seen flashing above the city, slashing through the inkiness of the ever-gradually darkening sky. The enemies have already reached the Lord's castle and there are some militias fighting with the guards at the north gate of the city wall. It looks like they can't hold up any longer. Lightning, who had carefully investigated the situation in the city, continued giving her detailed report to the prince. There are around 200 people attacking the castle. The first round of attacks failed. The enemies have weapons similar to our flintlocks, but they look completely different. Is Petrov all right? Roland inquired, showing concern. Roland currently cared most about the safety of his agent. He's fine, other than being a little frightened. But what? His family was killed, Lightning answered, her mouth twitching. His Excellency Petrov warned his father and asked him to get to the castle. However, his other family members were taken as hostages, including the Countess. They were being held by the four families in exchange for surrender and subsequently they were executed one by one. The little girl paused for a moment before continuing, I took an opportunity to fly into the castle to tell him that you would be coming soon and he had only one request. Roland nodded and asked, what is it? Blood for blood. There was an unwritten rule among nobles where people with bestowed titles were exempt from being murdered in times of battle. In the case of the family of Earl Honeysuckle, most of his loved ones had been honored with a knighthood. However, the four families had betrayed that rule. Not only did they hate the Honeysuckle family because of the benefits of Roland's support but they were also being driven by a new political power. In light of this, Roland was almost certain the power behind them was the new king, Timothy Wimbledon. He now realized there was no room for mercy and that he needed to crush them. Supporting the king and executing rebels was very different from helping the church slaughter nobles. The prince looked towards Stronghold and coldly gave the order, go straight into the city and take the dock. 8 heard the sound of footsteps below the city wall. He raised the flintlock numbly, aiming it at the dark hole below. This was the only path to climb up the city wall from within. There had been several rounds of attacks since the enemies captured the city gate, but they were still not able to seize the northern part of the city wall. The battle started yesterday at noon and had yet to cease. He hadn't expected to be standing in the cold, brisk wind for so long. After watching his supporting comrades fall one by one into pools of blood, all he could focus on was fighting. Are they coming again? Seeing a long-barreled gun pop up next to him, 8 tilted his head to the side and found that it was his unit leader, Bronze Hill. I could hear them, 8 replied feebly, but I have no idea how many there are in the darkness. They don't know how many of us are left either, Bronze Hill comforted him. So, how many are left? Bronze Hill answered after a moment's hesitation, only 5. Raven just took his last breath. And we probably won't see the sun tomorrow, 8 said bitterly. After the initial feelings of fear and panic, he then became numb. It was this experience that helped him finally understand what his instructor had meant when he said, "Only a real battle will quickly make you a man." However, this did not make the current situation any better. Out of the 3 units, there were only 5 people left. Even if the enemies didn't make it up the wall, they would likely die from starvation or exposure to cold. Can we still surrender? Surrender? Bronze Hill snorted. Didn't you hear what they were yelling? Kill the rebels. There's nothing but death ahead. We'd better take down as many as possible while we can. 8 knew the unit leader was right. Many captured soldiers from the Second Army were beheaded. They were not nobles, and nobody would pay a ransom. But, he just hated the idea of dying up here. The instructor had told them about how happy life in Border Town was and promised that once the months of the demons had passed, soldiers who did well in the Second Army would be transferred to the First Army and receive free housing there. There was plenty of food in Border Town, as well as running water and a heating system that could warm up a whole room without ignition. He wanted to survive and see the amazing things that his instructor had described. Here they come. Bronze Hill suddenly shouted while pulling the trigger. In the muzzle flash, 8 could see the figure of the enemy revealed in the darkness. 6 or 7 people were creeping slowly up along the wall, holding up their shields. He even caught a glimpse of the terror in their eyes. The unit leader missed his target. Fortunately, he was already pointing the gun in the right direction. He aimed at the fleeting figure and fired again. There was the muffled sound of a bullet hitting a wooden shield, and then a shriek, followed by the sound of a heavy object rolling down the stairs. Realizing that they had been exposed, the rest of the enemies rushed to the opening recklessly. Bronze Hill was struggling to reload his gun, but his frozen hands hindered the process, slowing him greatly. 8 jumped back from the open pit and groped frantically for his gunpowder sack. His heart sank when he found it empty and he realized that he had already used it all. According to his training, now was the time to use the bayonets. He pulled out the bayonet and struggled to attach the knife to the front of his gun. Clenching his teeth in frustration, he finally got it to attach and lifted it just in time as the enemy breached the hole and rushed at him. Instantly firing, Bronze Hill took the first man down, but there was a second close on his heels and this one managed to slide a sword into Bronze Hill's chest. 8 was stunned and his training took over. He mechanically thrust his bayonet in futility, only striking the enemy's shield. The enemy easily kicked him to the ground, disarming him completely. Am I really going to die here? Looking up at the night sky in despair, he noticed a dark figure above him. He normally wouldn't notice something so dark against the inky sky that night, but the shadow was close and rapidly getting closer still. It plummeted towards him like a collapsed curtain made of night. 8's eyes bulged as the shadow became more defined and he realized it was a giant beast. This was a beast only found in nightmares. Its huge crimson mouth was gaping, head larger than a bull's, and giant wings that almost covered the entire length of the city wall. The giant beast descended right in front of 8, crushing the enemies who just surfaced from the opening. Ow! Ow! It released a thunderous growl that was loud enough to wake the dead. Chapter 447, The Reaper. 8 was paralyzed with fright. He helplessly stared at the beast, who now also turned to look at him. He could clearly see mucus dripping from its beige fangs. Relax. I'm not going to eat you. The beast suddenly spoke in human language with a muddy voice, which almost horrified him enough to shriek. He was astounded again when seeing a girl jump off the beast's back. She walked towards Bronze Hill, turned him over and checked him out. She said to the beast, "He's alive. Maggie, send him to Nana." Ow! The beast seemed to understand what she said. It grabbed Bronze Hill with its claws and flew up again. The flapping of its wings stirred up the air, producing strong winds, which made 8 unable to open his eyes. When the wind and snow finally stopped, he squinted at the city wall but saw nothing at all, as if everything that had happened was just a dream. No, it's not a dream. That girl is still here, he thought. He vaguely saw the girl's figure in the darkness. There was apparently no light around, but her pupils were emitting weird golden lights, like stars in the night. You're... I came to help you. The girl's reply left him dumbfounded. What? 8 felt this was more implausible than a dream. You're here to help me? Yes. His Highness Roland sent me here. She squatted down, dug out a long sword from the flattened corpses and swung it, completely disregarding the fact that the sword was covered with flesh and blood. 8 was overcome by a feeling of sickness. He retched twice but vomited nothing except bile. Just then, outside the city wall, a battle cry resounded again. The beast had just terrified the enemies, but now that they saw it had left, and they had no idea what had happened up there on top of the city wall, they began to stir again. By His Highness, you mean the Prince of Border Town? He wiped his mouth and gasped. Is there another Roland besides him? The black-haired girl asked, as she started to dig another weapon from a corpse. 8 immediately turned his head away from her. But it takes at least 3 days to get here from Border Town. How did His Highness know about the nobles' rebellion so quickly? 8 swallowed hard and continued, and the beast just now. It's not a beast, but a witch that came here to save you. Her voice turned cold. I don't have time to answer all your questions. Just keep quiet. As there was no flintlock blocking them this time, the enemies easily came up on top of the city wall. When torches lit the place up again, they were surprised to find only a girl standing in front of him. Malicious laughter soon broke the silence. 8 immediately knew what they meant by the laughter. Stay alert. Don't give them any chance to play any dirty tricks on us. Don't worry, my lord. We'll take care of it, but later. When I'm done, I'll leave her to you. Hey, fine with me. Quickly come back here to me. 8 struggled to stand up, but what happened next made him stare in amazement. A silver light chopped down and the laughter died abruptly. The leader of the enemies was chopped into 2 pieces by the long sword. His shield and armor could not stop it at all. In fact, he didn't even see the girl strike. When the 2 pieces of his body fell down with blood spurting out from the wounds, everyone's smile froze on their face. However, this was just the beginning. The black-haired girl took 1 step forward and swept her sword. Before 8 could clearly see her movements, he heard the sound of flesh scraping and bones breakings. The 3 men had no time to react as they were ripped open in their stomachs. Their intestines fell out mixed with blood and spilled all over the ground. 8 opened his mouth a little but didn't know what to say. The girl looked back at him and said, Go find your surviving battle companions and gather on top of the wall. Someone will come to fetch you later. With these words, she jumped directly off the city wall. The city wall here was 30 feet tall. He endured all the pains in his body, fumbled to climb close to the edge of the wall and looked down. He saw the crowd down there turning into a meat grinder. The girl killed wherever she went. She freely dashed among the crowd, with her weapon moving around smoothly in her hand. She easily cut down the entire enemy who dared to stand in front of her, like the reaping of wheat. In less than a quarter of an hour, the enemy collapsed. They'd never seen such a fierce opponent, who was faster than a snow wolf and stronger than a grizzly bear. Facing her sword, nobody could react, dodge, or fight. The nobleman hurriedly retreated and the siege was extinguished, merely by 1 person. She followed the escaping crowd all the way, leaving a trail of blood behind her. At this sight, 8 dropped to the ground and cold sweat soaked his spine. That's a witch? Well. Whatever. I survived. The stronghold castle was tightly besieged by the 4 families' armies. A dozen bonfires around the castle brightly lit the place up. After a day and night of fighting, the 2nd floor of the castle had already been conquered. The honeysuckles now shrunk back to the very top of it and must be suffering from both hunger and fear up there. Jacques Med looked at this towering lord's castle and began to feel excited. After his father died, he traveled all the way back to the territory from the king's city just to inherit the earl's title, but now he had an even better chance. Timothy mentioned in the secret letter that if he could take hold of Longsong's stronghold for the king's city, the king's army would come here when the snow melted to conquer the rebel king, Roland Wimbledon. Once the rebel king was eliminated, Timothy would probably let him govern the western region. Together with the territory of Earl Honeysuckle, Jacques would have both the land and title of a duke. Duke Med. What a wonderful name. This castle would also become my residence. My lord, the 6th platoon has come back down, a knight came and reported, and they said they heard a lot less flintlock sounds from the enemy. Is it time to send iron armor platoons up there? Jacques Med nodded and said, go, and arrange it. Iron armor platoons were specially developed to fight against flintlocks. During the fighting, 3 or 4 soldiers formed a team, 2 of them held shields made of wood with several layers of iron coating, which could cover them all up, and had holes for aiming and firing. In order to make more shields like this, he made the tough decision to tear down a dozen knights' armors. Of course, those thick iron-coated shields had a weakness, too. As it was hard to carry and the whole team had to move slowly, they would easily become targets for their enemies. Luckily, the honeysuckles can't hold out any longer. Jacques sneered silently. They reacted unexpectedly quickly and withdrew part of their soldiers and knights back into the castle before the 4 families' armies arrived, and they had just only nearly 100 men. It's impossible for them to fight a long, hard battle. It'll probably take several days before Prince Roland receives the news. If I send Petrov's head as a gift to Roland Wimbledon, how will he look like? Chapter 448, A Hail of Bullets. My lord, the dock area in the West City seems strange, reported a guard who was in charge of sealing off the street. I've heard strange noises coming from there and sent 2 platoons to investigate, but none of them came back. What? Jacques Med said with a frown, you must have misheard it. No, it's clear, like the sounds of heavy, rapid breathing. Wheeze, wheeze, the guard said, imitating the sounds. Maybe it's the snoring sounds of a tramp? My lord, in this weather, anyone sleeping outside will be frozen to death, the guard insisted, and nobody can snore that loudly. It must be a giant almost as tall as the city wall if they're really snoring sounds. The earl stared at him for a good long while and then turned away, shouting, Knight Daucan. My lord, what can I do for you? A knight wearing the badge of the Maple family on his chest responded, striding toward the earl. Summon your platoon and follow my guard to investigate the dock in the city. Jacques patted the knight's shoulder and added, inform me at once if you've any news. Could you send someone else there? The young knight said, hesitating. My father urged me to enter the castle together with you. It won't take you long to go to the dock, but I can assure you here it'll take a lot longer, the earl said with a smile, and if the Honeysuckle family surrenders, I'll wait for you here. Fine. After the knight left with his guard, Jacques' facial expression turned stone cold. Keep dreaming. You think you can receive the same credit by sending a son here to enter the castle with me? His Majesty mentioned only me in the secret letter. Before long, he heard the distant sound of gunfire coming from the west. Jacques was instantly on the alert. What's that? The eldest son of the Maple family has no flintlock. When he was planning to send some of his knights there to check the situation, the guard who had reported to him earlier stumbled back into the battalion. My lord, things have gone wrong. What went wrong? The rebel king, he came here. The guard said with his eyes widely opened, thousands of enemies are heading for the castle. You meant Roland Wimbledon's army? Jacques raised his hand and slapped the guard on the face. Thousands of them? If you dare to talk nonsense, I'll hang you up on the city gate. My lord, they carry the flags of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. The guard did not dare to dodge. He got down on one knee and continued, I wanted the squire of Knight Daucan to catch 1 or 2 enemies to get further information, but the moment they charged towards them, they were. What happened to them? The earl pressed. They were shot down by intense gunfire. The earl could tell from the guard's face that he seemed to have witnessed very terrifying scenes. At that time, it looked like numerous fires popped out all of a sudden in the darkness, and the cracking sounds never stopped. 20 people only charged forward for less than 100 steps before they were all shot down, and so did the horses. The guard swallowed and went on, "My lord, I've never seen such an intense gunfire. If there weren't more than 1,000 enemies, how could they eliminate the knight's platoon in just a blink? Where is the eldest son of the Maple family? He's run away." The earl sank, weak-kneed, into his chair and was completely confused. How is it possible? The 4 families started to act from yesterday at noon, and Prince Roland came to support Longsong's stronghold tonight. If we count the messaging time, does this mean he needs only 1 day to come here from his town? Even when sailing smoothly with the wind the entire time, they can't reach here that fast, let alone while carrying 1,000 people. To transport that many people, he needs at least a huge fleet, but according to the intelligence, Border Town has no ship in the winter. How could things turn out like this? No, I have to be calm in such an emergency. Jacques Med wiped the sweat from his forehead and thought that maybe the guard did talk nonsense. Without torches, he could not see clearly how many enemies were there on the dock in the darkness when he was obviously shocked by their firing flintlocks. Flintlocks may seem powerful. However, their shooting range was merely about 40 steps, and their reloading speed and hit rate were extremely low. Assuming that every enemy is equipped with this kind of weapon, they won't be unbeatable for at most 24 soldiers who can march abreast in the street leading to the castle. If I inform the Wild Rose and the Wolf family now and gather all the knights, mercenary fighters, and guards to attack them after their first round of firing, maybe we could defeat them. Unlike battles and fields, the poor efficiency in flintlock reloading is a fatal shortcoming in street fights. Damn it. Jacques slapped on an arm of his chair and said to the head of his guards, "Go to invite Earl Wild Rose and the Viscount of the Wolf family to come here and order all the men with flintlocks to block the entrance of the castle. Go." Compared with crossbowmen, it's much faster to train flintlock soldiers. Let them block the enemies first. Their lives aren't worth much. If necessary, knights can tread on them. To his great surprise, the head of his guards came back and reported, "They've already left the battalion with their men." To besiege Petrov, the 4 families respectively held the 4 sides of the castle. Jacques did not expect that the other families received the news earlier than him. Now, the sounds of gunfire were nearing the castle. As the guard had described, they were the deep rumble of dense drums, loud and clear across the growing mounds of snow. These bastards. Jacques' heart froze. He looked at the castle for the last time. He had no choice but to order a retreat. This time only he and his guards had the chance to flee. His men in the castle were left behind. Outside the castle, the earl was shocked by the scene. The enemies were everywhere, and any knight who tried to break through the blockade would be shot down remorselessly. Their weapons were nothing like the flintlocks sent by Timothy. They could fire continuously and seemed to require no reloading. It was chaotic. Members of the other 3 families were trapped, with the exception of Knight Daucan, who had been the first to flee. "My lord, what should we do?" "Send for the iron armor platoons," he cried out. "We'll forge behind them and we'll be covered by their iron shields." After all the troubles, 3 iron armor platoons finally gathered and slowly moved forward holding their shields. The other knights found it and followed them, too. They knew that this might be their last chance to break through. Unfortunately, Jacques Med made a mistake. When they were only 100 steps from their enemies, the latter's weapons exploded with dazzling bursts of fire. The iron shields made to block lead balls were instantly riddled with bullets. The men in the front holding the shields were killed. Splashing metal debris shot through bodies, stirring up a thick fog of blood behind the shields. Before the earl could call out the order of charge, he was cut down in a volley of fire. Chapter 449, The Course of War. When Roland walked into the messy castle, Petrov and Earl Hull were kneeling down on one knee in the center of the hall, awaiting his arrival. All the bodies on the floor had been removed, but the smell of the blood lingered. The pieces of broken furnishings and weapons could be seen everywhere, He could almost imagine the killing scenes between the two parties in the battle for the castle. Rise. Roland walked towards Petrov, bending over to hold his shoulders. Yes, Petrov said in a choked voice, Your Highness, you are finally here. You did a good job, Roland said with a heavy voice. The 4 big families will pay a heavy price for this, and the murderers shall be brought to justice. I didn't guard Longsong's stronghold well. You did your best. It's not your fault. Roland sighed. Petrov was not a ruler of war. This was evident from the seizure of the previous city by the light cavalry and the rebellion of the nobilities this time. He was good at managing the territory, proficient in trading, and skilled in capturing opportunities, but he was not a Machiavellian. He was definitely not an expert at fighting and plotting. If it wasn't for the Second Army that was stationed in the castle in accordance with the emergency measure, he wouldn't have been able to hold more than 2 days. However, that did not mean Petrov Hull was not a good manager. If he was not good at war, he should be assigned to a territory without any war. Roland preferred operators with a business mind to those with fighting talents. I believe there must have been an inducement for this riot. Roland looked at everyone around him. This is a downright conspiracy. The enemy seeks to subvert the order of Western region in order to obtain benefits that don't belong to them. The scene quieted down. Everyone, including both the armed soldiers of the First Army and the wounded knights behind Petrov, had their gazes on His Highness. They have committed a felony for this, murdering the nobility and killing the civilians. After the war, we'll see that many people have lost their families, and many houses will have been looted. But their conspiracy didn't succeed in the end. It was your unyielding resistance that prevented Stronghold from falling into a greater tragedy. Your performance was heroic and your willpower was laudable. The knights slightly lifted their chests without realizing it. However, the war isn't over yet. These rebels are fleeing in panic, and it's time for us to seek our revenge. I swear no matter where the enemies are hiding, they won't escape the coming trial, be it in the territories of the 4 families, or King City. Roland paused and said categorically, the culprits who caused the rebellion are bound to be punished too. The blood you shed will not be in vain. Long live, Your Highness. Petrov and Earl Hull knelt down once again. Long live, Your Highness. The surviving knights and soldiers of the Second Army also began to kneel. Soon, everyone was kneeling on one knee with their upper body upright, right hand on the chest, shouting the slogan in unison. Long live, Your Highness. After comforting the people at the scene, Roland summoned Petrov, Banner, Brian, and Iron Axe into the study on the 3rd floor of the castle, which was the only place that had not been invaded. All the furnishings were basically intact. Roland knew that he would probably have to spend the next few days there. The first thing he had to do was to understand the situation regarding the battlefield within the city. He looked at Iron Axe, and the latter reported immediately, the witches have seized back the northern gate and the eastern gate which was once occupied by the 4 families. The First Army is eliminating the rebels within the city under Miss Sylvie's guidance. The order of the city should be restored by tomorrow morning. What about the casualties? A total of 6 people were injured so far, and all of them are from the Rifle Battalion, but they've been treated and cured by Miss Nana. What about the Second Army? Has it been counted? Not yet. But according to the latest news, there are more casualties. Brian hesitated. Both of the platoons sent to support the city wall have been defeated, and they haven't been gathered so far. Out of the 50 soldiers who were sent to defend the castle, 11 were killed, and almost none of the soldiers patrolling on the city wall survived. Roland nodded. The militancy of this era was not as high, enabling the 100 people to persist for 2 days. The defensive party tended to have the bigger advantages, especially when the enemy lacked effective assault weapons. If the other party wasn't using firearms, the Lord's castle could not be broken through with only the flesh and blood of the mercenary and guards. This was fully taken into account during the design of this building to prevent enemy attack. At this thought, he instructed Iron Axe, show me some of the rebels' firearms. Roland was really concerned about the new hot weapons of this era. Although this day was expected to come sooner or later since the birth of the snow powder, the development speed of Timothy really surprised him. Iron Axe carried out the order quickly. Only several minutes later, a few tube-like weapons of different lengths and shapes were carried into the study by soldiers. After seeing the actual objects, Roland quickly understood why the enemies could build the weapons in a fairly short time. These long tubes could not be called flintlock in the sense that they had no trigger and percussion device, and they were nothing more than metal tubes with a hole at each end. It was deeper at one end for loading gunpowder and bullets and had a needle-like hole at the end for ignition. The other end was shallower and could be used as the handle after inserting a bamboo stick or a wooden pole. It was very similar to the prototype of the firearm, structure-wise. The loading process of this primitive firearm was the same as that of the flintlock, but the launch was more troublesome. It required a gunman to hold the wooden pole under his armpit and ignite the gunpowder with the hand on the other side. Due to the limitation caused by the holding position, it was impossible to aim accurately and could only be roughly pointed straight ahead while shooting. But it was still undoubtedly a hot weapon. Putting aside all the inconveniences, its launch principle was completely consistent with the flintlock. Its barrel and projectile were almost the same as those of the ladders, so the power was far greater than crossbow bolts. If shot, the armor of knights would not hold the attack. Timothy's efforts on the customization could obviously be seen from the unique look of each firearm. Some were made of rolled steel with clear thumping traces left on the body of the pipe, while some were molded by wrought copper and looked smooth. Considering they were simply testing products to assist the four families, the firearm used by Timothy himself should be better. However, even the best firearm was merely a firearm. The King City had no chance of winning as soon as the launch of the spring attack began. They would be unable to face the Western Region Army armed with revolving rifles, bolt rifles, and HMGs, heavy machine gun. Roland shifted his gaze back to the four of them and said, "The First Army will be recovering the suburban territories of Longsong Stronghold one by one from tomorrow onwards. Any nobility who resists can be put to death on the spot. I hope the entire Western region will be unified after this week." "Yes, Your Highness," the four of them answered in unison. Chapter 450, Old Friends. René Med had been trapped in the basement of the Elks' mansion for half a month. He thought he could have stopped Jacques, but he hadn't expected his elder brother to make the first move. "Here is your lunch. Hope you enjoy it." Sean, the long-faced steward, brought a plate of sticky food to the cell. What was on the plate looked like a mixture of oatmeal and vegetables, and the portion was only palm-sized. "Set me free, you dumbass." René threw the food on the floor. Holding the cell bars, he shouted, "Jacques is a dumbass too. He has no idea what he's doing. It's not too late to let me out." The steward shook his head regretfully, took out a handkerchief and cleaned up his dirty shoes. "If I were you, I would have eaten that food instead of spoiling it. The Earl told me to bring you food once a day all this week, to let you save some strength." "Damn it. Haven't you heard what I said?" René burst out with strong language. "This isn't about a meal. If Jacques doesn't stop, he'll destroy the Elk family. For my father's sake, open this cage." Seemingly, the steward was moved by what René said in the end. As he was just about to leave, he stopped. "Your father? I think if he were still alive, he would have expelled you from this house." He then turned around and looked at René, expressionless. "Master, you seem to have forgotten that it was Roland Wimbledon who killed the Earl of the Elk family. On the other hand, the Honeysuckle family has not only gone over to Prince Roland's side, but also assisted him in suppressing the other four families. At this moment, your elder brother is trying to correct this mistake, yet you're scared to death. How can you be a qualified knight this way?" "It's not for you to judge whether I'm a qualified knight," René said angrily. "In the past 3 years, while I was defeating the demonic beasts in Hermes' defensive line, Jacques was busy enjoying wine and women in the King's City. Do you think it's out of bravery that he decided to attack the Honeysuckle family? Don't be ridiculous. He's only blinded by profit." Sean sighed. "Even if you're the younger brother of my Lord Jacques, you should show him some basic respect. After all, he is both an earl and the head of the Elk family. After this, the steward ignored Renee and left the basement along the stairs. When the door was closed, the basement returned to silence. Damn it! The second son of the Elk family smashed his fist down onto the floor forcefully. Since the beginning of winter, Jacques had begun to visit the other families more often. Renee didn't pay much attention to it at first. After all, he wasn't interested in managing his family. Besides, when he was taken captive by His Royal Highness the first time, Jacques refused to pay the ransom, and it was Petrov who offered him a helping hand and got him released from prison. Since then, the relationship between the two brothers had fallen to the freezing point. Even so, Renee didn't plan to fight with his brother about who would be head of the household. When he heard the news about the construction of Border Town, he even considered going to the town and serving Prince Roland by becoming an official guarding knight. But afterwards, there were some changes in the situation. During a private feast held in the Elk Mansion, Renee heard that the four families were planning to unite and fight together against Longsong's stronghold. That night, Renee rushed into Jacques' study and confronted him, but Jacques wasn't happy about it and threw him out. Thinking about it overnight, Renee decided to tell Petrov the news and lead his patrolmen to stop Jacques. Unexpectedly, his breakfast was poisoned by Jacques. When Renee woke up, he found himself in prison. Since then, despite his yelling and threatening, he hadn't yet earned himself a chance to meet with Jacques. Every day, he could only judge time by looking at the brightness of a louver in the basement corner, and the only person he had seen was Jacques' personal steward. Grr. With this lengthy growl coming from his stomach, he realized that he was hungry. Taking a glimpse at the scattered food on the floor, Renee turned his head and lay back onto the pile of straw on the floor. I'd better go to sleep. I won't feel hungry once I fall asleep. The moment Renee closed his eyes, a series of footsteps resounded in the basement. Could it be Jacques coming? He instantly hopped off the pile of straw and rushed to the bars. With the help of the dim light from the louver, he saw a small and slim figure. Obviously, that couldn't be the arrogant Earl. Brother, are you okay? When the person arrived at the cell, he found it was Aurelia, the third daughter of the Elk family. How did you get in? Jacques wasn't around, and those servants couldn't stop me. Aurelia saw the oatmeal on the floor and said incredulously, Is this what they are serving you? This is outrageous. Wait a moment. I'll tell the kitchen to cook something else for you. Jacques isn't home? What his sister said suddenly saddened Renee, and he almost forgot about his hunger. Where did he go? I've no idea. He left 2 days ago, Aurelia shook her head and said, along with most of the house guards. Otherwise, I couldn't have come here. Damn it. Renee was disappointed. Jacques left 2 days ago, and today is the third day. Even if I can get out now, I'm afraid it's already too late. Brother, I heard that Jacques was trying to hurt the Honeysuckle family. Is this true? Aurelia looked worried. Will my Lord Petrov be all right? Right. Aurelia has always had a crush on Petrov Hull. Although I've tried to set them up as a couple, it seems my friend Petrov has somebody else in mind. But now nothing can be done. Renee leaned against the bars and sat down, feeling feeble. He knew Jacques fully well. Jacques won't show mercy on the Hull family, which would definitely cause Prince Roland to take his rage out on the whole western region. Jacques has spent too much time in the King's City, so he's no idea what he's got himself into. Renee closed his eyes. He couldn't stop thinking about the day when he and his army attacked Border Town. Fires continued blazing in front of his eyes, thunder boomed all around his ears unceasingly, knights in the front rows seemed to be hitting an invisible wall, and their skills, gained through years of training and the courage of fighting for honor, had all lost their effectiveness in the face of the enemy's powerful weapons. From that moment on, Renee had totally lost the intention of fighting against His Highness ever again. Nobody could defeat His Highness' troops, at least no human beings could. But when Prince Roland gets to know what's happening in Stronghold and decides to sweep through this area, what's the use then if the Elk family gains a lot of profit? This time, Prince Roland may not let go of the four families. What's the matter, brother? Aurelia shook him, but he remained motionless. The elk family is screwed. Just then, some indistinct roars spread through the thick ceiling, and then the floor slightly trembled. It felt as if the mansion was hit by something. Is that what I think it is? René turned around, and saw his sister with the same surprised expression. Then came another dull, yet much clearer, thundering and a series of noises. René could hear panicked shouts from his family's servants coming from somewhere over his head. Could it be Prince Roland's army coming? René was stunned. How's that even possible? What's happening out there? Aurelia stood up. I'll check. Don't. René grabbed her hand. Don't go anywhere. Just wait here. Huh? Listen to me, René swallowed, and said in a tiresome voice, it might be dangerous outside. The roars quieted down before long. Only a few minutes later, a platoon invaded the basement. They wore brown uniforms and held strange, long-handled weapons. At a glance, René realized they were Prince Roland's troops. He felt totally hopeless. He had expected retaliation from His Highness, but not so quickly. Or maybe this is a drama directed and played by Prince Roland himself? Who are you? How dare you break into the Earl's mansion? Aurelia stood up and questioned them. A tall, strong man stepped out of the platoon. With an angular face and a chilling aura around his eyes, he looked as if he was from an alien race. Are you the second son of the Elk family, Knight René Med? The guy asked. Since you know who he is, you should retreat. What are you up to? Aurelia said, voice trembling, but still she stood in front of the bars. I'm René. Don't hurt her. She's innocent. René thought he was about to see something unbearable, yet the guy totally ignored Aurelia, and what he said next simply shocked René. I'm Iron Axe, commander of the First Army. His Highness Roland asked me to find you specifically, the guy said in a low voice, and he asked me to tell you that Mr. Petrov wants to see you. Chapter 451, Aspirations. René walked out of the Earl's mansion, squinted instinctively, and took a deep breath. It had been half a month since he last saw daylight and snow. To René's surprise, there were soldiers in uniform everywhere, not shamelessly plundering the mansion, but guarding crossroads in an orderly fashion. A few bloodstains dotted the snowy ground, but there were neither bodies nor scattered clothing around, which meant the soldiers didn't pillage the dead when they cleared the battlefield. What he saw confirmed his supposition that these troops were different from any he'd ever seen. Is Petrov all right? He looked at Iron Axe. How is Longsong Stronghold? Everything is all right. The tall, strong, foreign man spoke very little, but he'd answer as long as René asked. That means Jacques Med's plan didn't work. René was slightly relieved. If Stronghold is intact and the Honeysuckle family is unharmed, Petrov is bound to put in a good word for me. He didn't care about Jacques' fate. That idiot almost dragged the Elk family into a catastrophe, so whatever happened to him isn't my concern. Brother, what on earth did Jacques do? Aurelia leaned over and asked quietly. René hesitated, shook his head and said, I don't know. Aurelia instantly made an expression as if to say you're lying. René smiled bitterly. He really didn't know how to answer that question. He couldn't simply say that Jacques intended to rebel, because he only knew about the planning stages and didn't know how that plan turned out. After some silence, he asked, Do you really want to go to the castle with me? Of course. I'm very curious about what exactly happened to give these men a reason to break into the Earl's mansion in broad daylight. She stared at Iron Axe and said, I think Milord Petrov wouldn't just sit by and do nothing about it. René understood that his sister was actually worried about Petrov, so he finally nodded and said, all right. If you ask him in person, he might tell you the details. The group of people rode on horseback for about an hour along the snow-covered roads and reached the Stronghold Castle at noon. With Iron Axe leading the way, René and his sister stepped onto the third floor, which was heavily guarded by sentries placed every few steps. When he entered a room that looked like a study, René finally saw Petrov Hull, his childhood friend. However, Petrov only stood next to his desk respectfully. A gray-haired man sat by the desk, looking at René and Aurelia with interest and playing with a quill pen. Almost instantly, René recognized who this man was. He instantly went down on one knee. "Your Highness, René Med is here to salute you." "He is." Aurelia was a little surprised, but René tugged her clothes gently and hinted at her to bend a knee and bow. "We met each other in Longsong Stronghold," the prince said with a smile, "right in the castle's basement. According to what Iron Axe just told me, you were locked up there again?" René was embarrassed and didn't know what he should say. Luckily, the prince wasn't expecting an answer. "Please rise." "Before I ordered the attack on the Elk territory, Petrov had repeatedly assured me that you would never take part in Jacques Med's rebellion, and it seems he was right about you. But, how did you end up in the basement?" René cast an appreciative look at Petrov and told the prince what had happened in his family. "I see." The prince nodded. "It's a shame. If you could have stopped Earl Jacques, Longsong Stronghold wouldn't have gone through this disaster." That remark shocked René, and Aurelia couldn't help but ask, "What happened?" "Jacques Med colluded with the Maple Leaf, Wolf, and Wild Rose families, and they attacked Longsong Stronghold 2 days ago." The prince said coldly. "The attack led to mass casualties of innocent people, and 2 blocks were burnt down. To force the Honeysuckle family to surrender, they even hurt Petrov's family." René couldn't believe his ears. Even when fighting a rival noble, threatening them with their families is considered very shameful. How could Jacques do that? "This rebellion involved many parties, but I assure you that no one involved in the attack will escape the punishment of the law. All the rebels will be severely punished." The prince knocked on the desk and said, "I came to Stronghold to clean the entire western region and not let a single rat slip through my fingers." René felt his back break into a sweat. "Your Highness, I..." Roland waved his hand to interrupt him. "Don't worry, I won't take my anger out on innocent people, and the Elk family's offspring will be spared. Actually, I have a question for you. Jacques Med was killed in the rebellion, so are you willing to inherit the title of Earl and serve me, just as Hull does?" There was only one answer to this question. René Med knelt down without hesitation, a standard gesture of a knight, and he pledged to faithfully serve the prince. To his surprise, he felt quite calm while pledging his oath. Actually, he had never hated this prince who took his father's life. In a battlefield, anything could happen to anyone. Moreover, it was not the prince but Duke Ryan and the other 5 families who started the war. After the war, the prince didn't treat the defeated noblemen harshly, and he also exchanged captives for ransom, a conventional practice among the nobility. If father hadn't died in the battlefield, he probably could have gone back to our territory safe and sound, just as the Earl of Honeysuckle did. René was trained as a knight and held the values of a knight deep in his heart. A battle is plausible as long as it's righteous, and what Jacques did was not only unrighteous, but also had no purpose except to exacerbate hostility. For the sake of Aurelia and all the other innocent members of his family, he must accept His Highness' offer. Without the protection of the Elk family, these people would not be able to live a stable life ever again. After the pledge, the prince smiled and nodded. "In the following days, you and your sister can live in the castle. Petrov will arrange rooms for you. There are still a few members from other families that escaped who are fighting in the suburbs, so it's better for you to wait until this rebellion quiets down before returning to your territory." "Yes, Your Highness." As René left the study, Petrov followed. Looking at his haggard friend, René felt a range of emotions. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault." Petrov patted on his shoulder. "Don't worry about it." Somehow, René felt his friend was a lot different. He could see in Petrov's eyes a look he had never seen before, a subtle resolution and calmness that was as strong as steel that had been repeatedly tempered with fire. René realized that his friend was on his way to becoming a real leader. Chapter 452, The Unification. The rebelling nobles were powerless against the First Army, and it only took a round of firing in every confrontation to decide the victor. The First Army didn't even need to change cartridges before their enemies dispersed and ran away with their tails between their legs. Moreover, the enemies usually didn't even put up a fight, and the First Army only had to pursue and capture them. Iron Axe cleared through one territory per day and quickly conquered the regions governed by the elk, wolf, and wild rose families. However, when the troops reached the maple leaf territory, they began slowing down. They encountered some unexpected issues. Damn it. This is no different from Stronghold. Brian stared at the Earl's looming castle and spat angrily. It's protected by a moat. Was anyone hurt in the past round of attacks? Asked Iron Axe coldly. 2 unlucky men were wounded, one in the arm and the other in the back while retreating, but it doesn't seem serious, said Brian, frowning. The soldiers were at a great disadvantage because they were shooting upwards from the ground, so even if the enemies only had bows and bolts, they could still contend with us. Iron Axe knew that Brian was right. No one had expected the Earl of the Maple Leaf family to have a castle built like a tower which was supported by mountains and cliffs. The streams from the impassable mountain range were led into a 5-meter-wide ditch that formed a small moat surrounding the castle. Since the water was constantly flowing, although there were blocks of floating ice and snow, the moat was not frozen solid. The gate was the only entrance into the tower, so in order to reach it, they had to cross the bridge, where the enemy's force was most concentrated. There were no concealments around the Earl's castle, only plains of snow, so standing on the higher ground made up for the enemy's disadvantage of using crossbow bolts. After 2 rounds of probing attacks, the First Army only shot down 3 or 4 people and suffered many casualties themselves. I wish we'd brought cannons with us, said Brian bitterly. If we shot a few cannonballs at their gate, they would surrender in no time. It's too bad that the troops can't bring them here because it's too far from Stronghold, and the snow's too deep. Iron Axe glanced at the sky. Let's call it a day and arrange for the troops to set up camp. The territory of the Maple Leaf family was northwest of Longsong Stronghold, next to impassable mountain range, and it lay on the border of the western region. Simply walking here took almost a day, and the uncleared snow on the paths made it impossible to transport a 12-pound field artillery. According to reports, the Maple Leaf family barely contributed to the rebellion, and even the Earl himself didn't participate. This meant that their resources and power were all intact and stored in this guarded tower, making it very difficult to deal with without siege weapons. At night, bonfires were lit in the camp's tents. What should we do tomorrow? Brian asked, tossing wood into the fire pit. Order the soldiers to rush against the rain of arrows? As long as we can blast through that damn steel door, they're done for. But the First Army would also lose dozens of soldiers. Iron Axe shook his head and didn't answer. If he were still in the Iron Sand City, he would gladly sacrifice hundreds of soldiers to complete his mission without feeling regretful. However, after he came to the western region, he felt somewhat protective of the soldiers whom he watched improve and whom His Highness Roland put so much effort into. After a long pause, he sighed. Let's use the witches. Brian was shocked. The witches? Iron Axe didn't want to do this either. He remembered the prince had once told him that a decent army should be able to complete its mission independently at all times. However, this was not important at the moment. In order to reach their goal of uniting the western region in a week and to minimize casualties, he was willing to give up his pride. Also, His Highness also said that a good general accounted for his soldiers' lives. Send a messenger and tell the prince that we're in trouble and need Miss Maggie's help. He ordered. The next morning, Maggie and Lightning came to the camp. What happened? Cuckoo? Iron Axe coughed and explained his dilemma. The enemies are mainly concentrated at the top of the tower, so rifles can do little damage to them. There's also a steel door blocking the entrance, so the First Army can't get close enough to place explosives. We can only rely on you to open the gates. We've got this, the little girl said, patting her chest. Throwing explosives was a familiar task to them, and they were even trained with the First Army in the small town. Iron Axe nodded and immediately arranged the soldiers to begin the last attack, even if the explosives didn't have the desired effect, they would at least scare the enemies and give themselves enough time to break through the steel door. "Are you fighting as well?" Brian watched surprisedly as Iron Axe strapped a rifle to his back and stuffed a few cartridges of bullets into his belt. "Rather than say charge for me, say charge with me. Iron Axe smiled. His Highness always said this. When the two men led their soldiers into the charging position, Maggie's figure appeared in the sky. She transformed into a giant beast and charged towards the tower, her claws grabbing a bag of the new explosives. Everyone witnessed this stunning scene and the First Army erupted in cheers, while the side on top of the tower descended into chaos. The mercenaries and guards of the Maple family all turned their crossbow bolts around and began shooting at the beast with no avail. Meanwhile, Maggie finished collecting her strength, flapped her wings forcefully, rose rapidly into the air, and released the bag. The bag of explosives shot towards the top of the tower like a cannonball. Iron Axe felt his surroundings go quiet, and then he saw a glaring ball of fire rise from the top of the tower. Suddenly, the earth began to shake. The entire world seemed to be trembling, and huge columns of smoke shot up through the snow. A heat wave struck him in the face, forcing him to stumble back a few steps with his ears ringing. This is the power of God. Iron Axe couldn't help but recall the first time when he witnessed His Highness' gunpowder test, but the explosion this time was much more powerful. Even standing almost 100 meters away, he could feel the scalding heat of the fireball. As for the enemies close to God's punishment at the top of the tower, their fates were all easily imaginable. He quietly prayed to the three gods, raised his rifle high, and shouted, "For His Highness the Prince, First Army, charge! For His Highness!" The soldiers echoed his words and swarmed to the Earl's castle. This time, no one dared to stop them. When Iron Axe returned to Longsong's stronghold, it was already the 6th night. The entire western region was finally under Roland's control. Chapter 453, Dealing with the Aftermath. The stronghold's castle office was much roomier than that of the small town. Tall bookshelves with gilded edges lined the walls to his left and right and were filled with all kinds of books. The bookshelves provided any subject he could dream of, from epics to travel notes. In order to reach the books on the upper levels, a wooden ladder was placed next to the bookshelves for easy access. Probably out of safety concerns, the only waist-high window in the office was equipped with metal railings on the outside. When the daylight hit the room, he could clearly see a stripe of sun ray splash over the old fur rug while feeling a sense of aloofness as if he were standing against the world. Anna would definitely love this place, Roland couldn't help thinking. However, to him, the brightly lit town office with large windows suited his taste better. Even though it was small, it was comfortable. As for Nightingale, he could tell by her habit of sleeping by the fireplace that she would not like it here at all. Suddenly, someone knocked on his door. "Come in." Roland placed the secret history of the western region he was holding back onto the bookshelf. "Your Highness." Petrov Hull entered the office and placed a stack of paper onto his desk. "I've finished collecting the data you asked for." Roland walked back to his desk and read through the list of the nobles carefully. "These are all the nobles left in the western region?" "Yes." Petrov explained, "They're divided into two main categories, guilty and innocent. After that, I ranked them by family names. There are 64 people who are guilty, and 137 people who refused to rebel or had no knowledge of the rebellion. The innocent people are mostly free knights, and lower-level nobles." Roland flipped to the first page and saw the name of Roman Candy, the Earl of Maple Leaf family, listed on the top. According to Iron Axe's report, this great noble hid in a wine barrel in his basement after his castle was seized, and he soiled his pants out of fear when the First Army found him. He was also the noble with the highest rank among the captured in the War of Unification. Next was an entire page of the nobles from the Maple family, which included 2 sons, other relatives, and knights. Roland quickly finished reading the list and felt very satisfied. Great job. The 6 families of the western region had literally become history. Lion Ryan, Maple Leaf, Wolf, and Wild Rose were completely crushed, and although honeysuckle and elk still remained, they were no longer feudal nobles. Now, all the power in the western region belonged to Roland. "Your Highness," Petrov hesitated for a bit before asking, "Sir Iron Axe convicted the people on that list. Could there be any misjudgment?" Roland couldn't help chuckling. "He's a very skilled interrogator and didn't use torture to force confessions, so I think his final judgment is trustworthy." Meanwhile, his interrogation was just a matter of formality. After all the nobles were locked into prison, Nightingale double-checked each of them. It only took her a few simple questions to determine if they had involved in the rebellion. This was also why Roland felt confident in addressing the noble with a heavy hand. With Nightingale's help, he could ensure that he wasn't missing any guilty people or condemning any innocent ones. He didn't have to worry about shedding innocent blood or exonerating the real culprits. "So, what do you plan to do with the guilty nobles?" "Why do you ask?" Roland raised his head and glanced at Petrov. "Are some of these men your friends?" "No, Your Highness." He shook his head. "I just think that if you hang them all, it might harm your future rule." "You were talking about an eye for an eye a week ago." The prince raised his eyebrow curiously. "Now you want to spare them?" "I do want all these people to go to hell, but even if I strangle them all to death myself, it wouldn't change anything. It might even cause the other nobles to hate the Honeysuckle family. Also, if everyone learns that you've executed the nobles, other cities might resist your rule." After hearing this, Roland was quite surprised. This was the logic of a seasoned politician, who set aside personal emotion while weighing the pros and cons. It seems that this battle hasn't made him hate fighting but actually helped him become mature. "It doesn't hurt to tell you this beforehand." He stood up and walked to the window. "I'm going to announce everything about this matter to the people and hold an open trial for all the rebels at the square, including the nobilities, guards, squires, and mercenaries, the ringleaders and direct organizers of the rebellion, as well as scoundrels with the people's blood on their hands. They will all be hanged. People who are guilty of following their orders will be stripped of their titles and sent to the North Slope mine. This way, only 5 or 6 noblemen will be hanged. The Earl of the Elk family and the Viscount of the Wolf family died in battles, so those who survived will be trading their titles for their lives. When the message gets out, I don't think anyone will see this as too harsh a punishment. After all, rebelling against the king is a capital offense." Petrov sighed in relief. "Your Highness is merciful." When the eldest son of the Honeysuckle family left, Roland felt an unfamiliar feeling of satisfaction. This operation had cleared all the obstacles for him in the western region, so he could easily make laws and distribute orders throughout this vast land. More importantly, he gained the support from many people and nobles. After the rebels were removed, only supporters would remain. This was especially true for the nobles. After losing their feudal and legislative power, they would have to wholeheartedly follow and spread his policies if they wanted to continue living a comfortable life. Since the nobles had more resources than civilians, it wouldn't take them much thought to figure out how to profit from them. Once they started to gain small profits, they wouldn't ever want to go back to their old lives. After all, these low-level nobles had never gained much from their territories, and sometimes even went into debt if they didn't manage them well. They would soon realize that as long as they played by the rules, they would live an unimaginably comfortable life. There was no doubt that he had taken a big step toward his city-building plan. Roland wiped off the water vapor on his window and looked at the city enveloped in snow. Since he still had to stay in Longsong's stronghold for a while to deal with governmental affairs, he might as well refurbish this office to his own liking. For example, he would start with the French windows. Chapter 454, Pensions and Punishment. Roland made a speech at the theater of Longsong's stronghold 3 days later. To advertise the speech, he asked Petrov to relate the details of the rebellion to the entire city beforehand and also instructed Maggie to bring Echo from Border Town. There was a smaller audience than he had expected. Although it was already spring, the endless snow stopped people from going outside. Fortunately, driven by the prince's promise that soldiers killed in action will be well compensated, all members of the Second Army and their families came to the theater. It would take Roland some time to earn trust from the rest of his subjects, but Roland believed the best marketing was word of mouth. Once the seed was sown, it would spread its roots to more people. This was the reason he insisted on an army consisting of ordinary men. They were as sharp as swords, as impregnable as fortresses, and perfect role models for publicity. Good morning, my subjects. I'm the Lord of the Western region, Roland Wimbledon. I believe most of you have already heard my name. Roland surveyed the audience and continued, first of all, I'd like to express my deepest sorrow and grief for those who were injured or lost their lives in the rebellion. This was a conspiracy plotted in King City. In order to disturb the peaceful Western region, Timothy has tried to wage war against us numerous times. Unfortunately, the four families of Western region didn't side with the people, but instead helped the wicked perpetuate wicked deeds, thus causing this tragedy. The prince did not linger on the details of the rebellion. Compared with a formal speech, people were usually more interested in the rumors circulated in taverns. Therefore, he soon switched to the more popular topic of compensation after a brief introduction. During the rebellion, 56 out of 112 soldiers in the Second Army were killed in action. In addition, rebels looted and burned the residences, leading to 48 deaths among civilians and reducing 12 properties to ashes. Roland spoke in a low voice. I hereby apologize to the subjects in Longsong Stronghold. As the lord of the territory, I've failed to fulfill my obligations. The prince's words stirred up the audience, who apparently had never heard any royal family members apologize to civilians. Many of them were shocked and startled, but Roland thought this was the attitude a lord should have. He was not as inscrutably arrogant as other nobles, who always treated civilians with an air of scorn and condescension. History taught him that a ruler would not be truly accepted by his people unless he viewed them as his equals. I promise that those people won't die for nothing. Not only would soldiers killed in battle receive a proper burial, but their families would also receive a pension of 5 gold royals. Plus, they can apply for food and charcoals from the city hall as additional compensation every month in the future. This pension plan is exactly the same as the First Army's, and I assure you subjects who join the Second Army as of today will also be equally compensated. Few people cheered for the prince's promise. Apparently, most of them were skeptical about Roland's alleged pension plan. Corruption and briberies among officials were normal on this land, so even winter relief rations were sometimes mixed with sand and leaves. How could they possibly believe that they would receive gold royals? Nevertheless, Roland had already thought of a solution to maximize the effects of his advertising. He clapped his hands, and 2 soldiers from the First Army came up to the stage with a vault, followed by Petrov and Iron Axe. I've got a list of the soldiers who sacrificed themselves in the battle here. Now the governor of Longsong Stronghold, Petrov Hull, will distribute pensions to you personally. When the soldiers dumped the shiny gold royals on the table, the audience finally became a little more enthusiastic. Ayat, from the 1st Gun Battalion of the 2nd Army. Chapiter, from the 1st Gun Battalion of the 2nd Army. As Iron Axe slowly read out the names on the list, the soldiers' family members went up to the stage one by one and took the gold royals with excitement, bowing and kneeling in gratitude. For a time the theater was so chaotic that Roland felt Nightingale lay her hands upon his waist. Fortunately, there were no accidents. By the time everybody had received their pensions, it was almost noon. Roland waved his arm to silence the murmuring audience. Those who lost their homes during the war will also receive a shelter and food. Food will be delivered to you by assigned staff until the months of the demons end. Why, Your Highness, what about after the months of the demons? Asked someone in a loud voice. Of course, the inquirer was created by echo. By then, the city hall will have created a great number of jobs with competitive salaries and benefits. As long as you're willing to work hard, you don't need to worry about food. Roland raised his right hand and announced, the Western region won't forget those who have contributed, and neither will I. This time his speech received a warm welcome as the audience raised their right hands in response. While the subjects cheered for the speech, Roland instructed his men to distribute the porridge, bringing people's high spirits to a peak. By the afternoon, many more people had gathered at the theater. Since all the seats were occupied, many people squatted in the hallway, obviously waiting to watch the trial. It seems everybody loves to see a prisoner be prosecuted, both in the world I used to live in and the current one. Roland asked Iron Axe and Petrov to conduct the execution, while he himself sat in a box on the second floor of the theater as one of the spectators. The verdict had been reached long before. The prisoners were led onto the stage and lined up on their knees in front of the spectators, with armed soldiers standing solemnly behind them. Iron Axe read out the counts, and Petrov the verdicts, after which the soldiers escorted them to the execution ground, the Stronghold Square. At the sight of the prisoners, some of the victims' family members went up to tussle with them. As long as the fight was not life-threatening, the First Army just stood by. Nobody took pity on these scoundrels, who should have known the subsequent consequences the moment they committed murder and plunder. In the end, 132 prisoners were sentenced to death, 6 of whom were great nobles. The rest were mercenaries, guards, and servants. The execution methods varied. Since gallows were limited in number, only the nobles had the privilege to be hanged, whereas others were shot. It was also the first time firearms were used for execution. The other 900 people who had participated in the rebellion but had not committed murder were imprisoned, awaiting to be sent to the North Slope mine in batches. Now, Roland had weeded out all the nobles who challenged his authority in the western region. The following day, he summoned the innocent nobles to the castle hall. As it was just the beginning of the cleanup, he still had a lot of work to do before he could truly rule this region. The most important step was to establish a new order. Chapter 455, The Second Step of City Construction. Roland arranged a feast for the nobles to ease their minds. A long table covered with a white tablecloth stood at the center of the hall, with a large variety of delicacies, delicious wines, and beautifully arranged flowers on it. The nobles were seated on either side of the table facing each another. After drinking a few glasses of red wine, everybody seemed to feel more comfortable and less stressful. Given that the honeysuckles and the elks were both Roland's supporters and that all of the great nobles had been crushed, these petty nobles were unlikely to strike up a discordant tune at this hour. On the contrary, they voluntarily revealed their intentions to stand on Roland's side during the conversation. Under such circumstances, Roland knew it was time to talk about his new policies. After they all had been fed, he distributed the booklet that was prepared beforehand to each noble. It was the marketing graphic book which he carefully designed and drafted. "Your Highness, what's this?" As he expected, the nobles soon asked in surprise, "Why are the drawings in this book are so lifelike?" "Yes, they look so real. It doesn't look like a picture. No paint can express such delicate colors." They were, no doubt, nobles from the big city, who knew how to properly appreciate artwork. Roland clapped his hands and replied with a smile, "They are indeed illustrated by a painter. The only difference is she's a witch, and the paints she has used are actually her ubiquitous magic power." All of the nobles were startled by these words, not sure whether they should put down the booklet or not. "The local church has fallen from power. What are you worried about?" The prince said, raising his brows, "Witches are no different from us. I've confirmed that myself many times." Petrov almost choked. "Your Highness is right. Of course your Highness is correct." "Haha," the other nobles chimed in, managing to summon up a laugh. Looks like I just said something that contains an unintended meaning." Roland put on a look of indifference and switched the topic while thinking. Ever since he became a prince over a year ago, he had noticed that his ability to remain unflappable amid changes had improved by leaps and bounds, or rather he had become increasingly bold. The point is the story inside it. The drawings are just to make it more readable and interesting. While the nobles were still absorbed in the story, Aurelia, the elk's girl, looked up abruptly and asked, "Is this the family history of a noble?" "Aurelia," René reminded her while lowering his voice, "you should call the prince your highness." "Correct. He used to be a noble in the western region." Roland gestured René that it was fine and then continued, "Some of you may still remember him." "Your highness." "I know him," answered one knight. "His name is Tiguay Pine." We used to be neighbors and his territory used to be adjacent to mine. I also met him once, someone else recalled. He was just a baron back then. His father was a feudatory of Zhou Cole. But since Lord Zhou left the western region, his territory has diminished. Discount Tigue is currently living in Border Town. Roland said, smiling. The graphic book records how we met, as well as what happened later. As you can see, he's a noble living in a society regulated by the new system. He's now busy practicing flintlock. I expect that right after the months of demons, he'll take his daughter and guards to Misty Forest to have some fun hunting there. As far as I know, ever since he sold his territory to the east of Stronghold and settled down in Border Town, not only has he been promoted to a higher rank, but his properties have increased by several times as well. Fear originated from the unknown. The same held true for changes to the system. As the nobles were ignorant of what impacts all these changes would bring about, they abhorred anything foreign or unfamiliar. In order to reduce their fear and resistance, Roland picked Tigue Pine as a living example and asked Soraya to sketch out his life in a cartoon format. Compared with those dull biographies, cartoons apparently presented the details of the story in a more vivid way. You may have known that I'm planning to build a city in the western region. In fact, I've been thinking about that for quite a long time. By then, Border Town, Longsong Stronghold, and the narrow land in between will all be consolidated into one, Roland continued. Someone may ask how the two towns, so distant from each other, can possibly be connected. I have to say that the unification will be confined only to administration. In other words, the new city will be governed by the same laws and policies. This is also the reason I take back nobles' feudal and legislative powers. Your Highness, but our territories, somebody asked. They'll still be yours, he interrupted. Like I said, you won't lose anything except these two types of power. The very nature of feudalism is to grant lands to others who will then become your subordinates, and thereby expanding your influences, leading lower nobles to defend against enemies and fight for profits for you. However, a professionally trained army will be responsible for city defenses under the new system. As long as you follow the rules, you'll gain far more than you used to. After all, you benefit more from slicing up a bigger cake than sharing a small one. While the nobles were silent, Roland sipped tea before continuing his persuasion. You've never been to Border Town, so it's perfectly normal that you don't know how much you can actually gain. In fact, the town's revenues for the latter half of the year reached 30,000 gold royals. It could have been 10,000 more if the months of the demons hadn't come so soon. The nobles all gasped out. 30,000? Roland had learned the annual financial situation of Stronghold from Petrov a long time ago. The annual income of the city hall was no more than 30,000, and these petty nobles obviously earned much less than that. 100 gold royals would be a fortune to them. As you'll be administrators of trades of all kinds in the future, you'll certainly be well paid. Roland went on, back to the consolidation matter. Aside from the unification of administration, the two towns will also be closer geographically. For example, it takes me 1 day to travel from Border Town to Longsong Stronghold now. Once the construction of Kingdom Main Street is completed, it'll take less than a day to cover the distance on foot, and half a day by horse or bike, not to mention other faster transportation methods. What's a bike? Aurelia questioned curiously. A manually operated riding apparatus that runs fast on a flat surface. The prince mused. I bet in 5 years, no, in 3 years we'll be able to work in Border Town after having breakfast in Stronghold. As Kingdom Main Street ran straight between Stronghold and Border Town, it reduced the distance to a mere 60 kilometers, allowing people to travel within half an hour by tram or car. Nevertheless, most of the nobles cared little about transportation. The knight who claimed to be Tigue Pine's neighbor asked cautiously, Your Highness, by what you just said, did you mean that you want us to manage Stronghold? Yes and no. Roland shrugged. Like I said, the consolidation of the two towns will be limited only to administration. The Stronghold will become a district of the city, directly administered by the city hall. But considering commuting a day to work still sounds quite unrealistic, for the time being, I'll set up a secondary city hall in Longsong district. It'll operate in the same way as Border Town, with multiple secondary departments under it. You'll work in those secondary departments dealing with local matters. Secondary departments, the nobles echoed, looking bewildered. It isn't simple to manage a town. Although you'll get paid well, it won't be that easy to do your part, Roland said bluntly. Therefore, I need you to come to Border Town with me once we've re-established order here. I want you to see with your own eyes what a well-functioning city hall should look like. With respect to city management, you've got a lot to learn. Chapter 456, The Differences. After explaining the administrative integration plan, Roland raised his cup and took several slow sips while waiting for everyone to process the information. He needed a lot of people in order to maintain the area's daily perimeter patrol. In a time before the general literacy rate improved, he had to rely on the nobles. Most of them had their primary education and they had experience in management. If there was a noble that distinguished himself from the others, he would promote them and place them in charge of a city or territory on behalf of himself. If he was still living in his previous world, this position would be referred to as a governor or a mayor. Several minutes later, Roland brought up the next topic. It was time to crack down on crime. In his idea about the new order, the Black Street organization wasn't needed. Everyone in the city could find work and they didn't need to pillage, so there was no demand for stolen goods. He probably couldn't have accomplished this in a highly developed, modern city with a population in the 10 million range. The oversaturation of minimum wage jobs in the market would create a high unemployment rate. Fortunately, the population of the western region, including Longsong Stronghold and the whole suburban area, was no more than 60 to 70,000 people. Since the major development had yet to start, the townspeople could find work as long as they wanted a job. How much do you know about rats? You mean Black Street rats? Renee Med coughed. I've done business with them before. What kind of business have you done with them? Roland asked with interest. Renee swallowed hard, a little embarrassed. I was the leader of the Raging Fire, and I fought with several rat gangs over territory. Bahaha. Several people broke into laughter. Roland was astonished. He had never expected that the Earl's second son used to deal with rats. Besides, Raging Fire was such a lackluster name. He started to doubt the legitimacy of Renee being the Earl Med's son. Your Highness, the truth is, Petrov started to explain, several years ago, Black Street forces were running rampant at the dock. Almost every day both civilians and foreign businessmen were killed, and the patrols would turn a blind eye to the matter. Earl Renee couldn't stand it anymore, so he brought in his own guards and a group of people from the refugee camp, and together they drove the rats out of the dock. At the time, he was writing to me daily to keep me updated on the progress of the operation. I was far away at the King's City during that time. In the letter, he told me it was a war that equaled the one against the demonic beasts, so I think. Petrov, that's enough. Renee interrupted, embarrassed. I was bored and just wanted to do something to occupy myself at that time. So that was the reason. It was just the impulsive, yet gallant, actions of a young noble, which was a demonstration of his chivalrous demeanor. Roland believed that the second son of the Elk, who loved fighting as a youth, enjoyed nothing more than to command a group of followers. So, while Raging Fire was not a real army in the sense, what they fought was indeed a real battle. What of this gang now? I don't know. Renee scratched the back of his head. After I went to defend Hermes and fight against the real demonic beasts, I stopped all contact. Roland nodded. Actually, I'm going to eradicate all the rats in Stronghold to enable everyone to live a peaceful life. Your Highness, I'm sorry to say this, Renee hesitated before saying, but that's probably impossible. Why? He frowned. I have the First Army at my side. Are the rats more difficult to deal with than the knights? That's not what I mean. Renee seemed to be looking for the right words to phrase it. They're weak, timid, and with no weapons or armor. They don't even know any operation tactics. Basically, they're by no means comparable to knights. However, if you execute them as you execute the rebels, that's to say, execute them just because they used to be rats, I'm afraid there won't be many civilians left in Stronghold after the cleanup. You mean, Roland said. Rats and civilians are mixed together, they are one and the same, Your Highness. Renee replied respectfully, after a particularly bad year, when the months of demons are long, many civilians have to become rats to sustain themselves. That's why most lords turn a blind eye to the existence of Blackstreet. An internal conflict is apparently better than an external riot caused by starvation. Roland's face clouded over. He had never thought about how the rats came into being. What about their organizers? A few of these people are habitual criminals and some of them are supported by the local nobles, but there are also some criminals from other towns. Well, I hope none of you are supporting any rats now, the prince stated while glancing around the long table, sullen expression clear. All the nobles hung their heads in response. The prince sighed, it doesn't matter now. As long as you help with my cleanup plan, I will forgive your past misdeeds. After a pause, he looked at Renee. I have a task for you. Yes, Your Highness. In the coming month, I will be focusing on cracking down on all of the criminal activities in Stronghold. You should cooperate with the First Army to eliminate all of the Blackstreet gang leaders and completely break down all their organizations. As for the specific methods, I'll send someone to you with instructions. Your Highness, what about the citizens that are depending on them? Without the gangs to provide them with food, they are not likely to survive the months of the demons. Renee was worried. Plus this year the months of demons arrived earlier than usual, so there might be even more people depending on them than in the previous years. I'll let Petrov open the barn and distribute food to the citizens until the end of the months of demons. The nobles around the table started to protest, Your Highness, that's not going to work. That type of support will just make things worse. After that, everybody in the town will become a beggar. All of the nobles ventured to prevent him. Roland slammed his fist down, hitting the table hard. I've made up my mind and I don't want to hear your protests any longer. Roland knew the nobles thought the worst of people and believed them to be lazy, ignorant, incompetent, and filthy. They believed that the citizens were very greedy in their nature and considered them to be absolutely hopeless. However, Roland thought differently and knew the strength of the people. They may appear dumb, but with guidance and a role model, they could be a game changer. If people were really as useless as the nobles thought, how were they able to keep changing the world? In fact, trying to better people was the best investment. Even the slightest positive change would have a larger payoff than could be expected. Finally, I want you to spread this message as soon as possible. Roland looked to Petrov, you have experience in this, so I want you to work on it. If the subjects can't read the message, get someone to read it to them. Just make sure the written message contains what we have talked about here today. All of what we have discussed? Petrov asked with a surprised look. Even the information about the rats' cleanup plan? Yes, include that and the information about the barn opening to distribute food. Roland glanced at the nobles around the table, challenging them. These are the conditions that create a well-functioning city hall and are a necessity in order for it to run properly. Publicize the policies, answer the people's questions, and accept feedback. This is the best way to implement a change to policy. Roland believed he needed to first teach the nobles, and then unify the law by consolidating the administration, as well as enhance public safety, all the while carrying out political propaganda before re-establishing order. Chapter 457, The Music of Fantasy. You don't need to come with me. Echo walked along the Redwater River, the snow under her shoes crunching. Here the city isn't safe. It's not border town. Iron Axe walked behind her, with 2 steps between them. His Highness told me to protect you if you leave the castle without other witches accompanying you. I shouldn't have told him. She mumbled, breathing out into the cold air. Also, you don't need to call me lady anymore. You will always be the head of the Osha clan in my heart, my Lady Drow Silvermoon. When he mentioned Osha, Echo fell silent. Even though Iron Axe couldn't see her expression, he could feel Echo sadden at the mention of her clan. He wanted to console her, but he didn't know how or what to say. So, he just kept his mouth shut and followed her silently. The branch of Redwater River that wound its way through the field outside of the city was different from the one that flowed into the inner city, which was almost a straight line. The river levees on both sides were covered by masonries, stacked, flat, and neat. About every 10 steps, there was an opening with stairways to the river, which allowed the people to get water from the river. Today's snowfall hadn't been too heavy and there were several pedestrians on the street. The men and women would look at Echo with surprised expressions on their faces. Lady Silvermoon was tall and shapely with a lovely figure. Her beige skin and long blue-gray hair were quite special and eye-catching. In the inland of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, it was seldom that one would see a purebred from the Sand Nation. Let's switch to the other side of the river. Echo obviously wasn't enjoying the attention. Yes. They cautiously stepped on a frozen arch bridge across over the river and then arrived at the eastern zone of Stronghold. There were almost no houses and vast areas of farmland were all covered by snow. What they could see was just limitless flatlands and a dim, black figure of the city wall. This area was in sharp contrast to the western zone of the city. This place is nothing like the Iron Sand City, Echo said. When I was in the southernmost region, I thought everywhere was the same. The sands covered almost all of the ground. Water sources and the oasis were the most valuable resources and people would fight to the death over them. However, here, no blood would be shed over the Redwater River. If they want to drink the water, they just need to crouch down and drink it. However, here they would fight for other things, Iron Axe said seriously, such as gold royals, jewels, honor, status. There's no escape from fights. Really? But, Nightingale told me that our prince would end all disputes. She looked up at the cloudy sky. No matter who you are, people of the Sand Nation or people of the Four Kingdoms, ordinary people or witches, you can enjoy equal rights and live a free life. I don't know. Iron Axe hesitated. He couldn't imagine that everyone would throw off all barriers and live together peacefully. He thought that even though His Highness had the power of the gods and he would undoubtedly conquer all of his enemies, it would just be impossible for him to make all of his enemies accept his dominance willingly. Making enemies during the process of conquering was an unavoidable byproduct of battle. Do you want to go back to Iron Sand City? Echo suddenly asked. No, Lady Silvermoon. Iron Axe quickly came to his senses and answered without hesitation. I've sworn to the 3 gods that I'll serve His Highness, Roland Wimbledon forever and help him to expand his territory. Don't worry, my lady. His Highness has promised to seek revenge for you. Please believe in him. When you go back to Iron Sand City, no one will disrespect you. But I don't want to be the head of the Osha clan, she whispered. I'd like to stay somewhere the trees are evergreen. I'd like to stay with Wendy and Nightingale. I'd like His Highness to teach me songs. I hope someday I can go back to have a look, but I don't want to live in the desert and continuously fight for water. Either way, you're the only successor of Osha in my heart. Iron Axe didn't speak his mind fully. Instead, he just looked down and said, no one can force you. They walked across the white field to an open area where Echo stopped. I'll practice here. I don't think I will disturb anyone. Iron Axe knew that her power was to make various sounds and she usually practiced in the backyard of the town's castle. But this time, in order to not disturb the important meeting between His Highness and the nobles, she intentionally chose here to practice her power. He nodded and took 2 steps back. I'll stand guard for you. Oh, I made a song for our hometown. Echo turned around. Would you like to hear? A song? Iron Axe was a little surprised. Yes, I learned to use the arrangement method His Highness taught me. I now mix various instruments sounds together to add a layering effect and build complexity. Echo talked about this with a relaxed expression on her face. I've tried it and to my surprise, it worked. I didn't know a song could be so pleasant. Each added tone would add in a distinct feeling. I don't know where His Highness learned this method though. When I was sold to King City, I never heard anything about something like this from any noble. Prince Roland was always special, said Iron Axe. He believed the gods favored Roland. Yes. No one treats witches as sincerely as him. Echo fully agreed with Iron Axe. However, His Highness gave me really strange and irrelevant names to the mixed performance methods, such as electricity sound and agricultural heavy metal. She shook her head with a smile. I think only he could think up names like that. Before Iron Axe could reply, she started to sing. When the mixed melody reached his ears, he was shocked and immediately stood, frozen in place. What an amazing tune! It sounded like the sands had gently touched the oasis. It was like a bright fire plum bursting from the earth's depths. At the moment, Iron Axe felt that he had been transported to the desert and was standing under the scorching sun. Is this an illusion? He looked down and found that the snow had disappeared and he was now standing in an oasis. When he looked into the distance, what he could see was only sand. The girl before him kept her eyes closed. Her song resounded through the air as she stood in the shallow water, disturbing its smooth surface. What a breathtaking beauty! Going through sand and dust to seek the traces of the oasis. Your footprints were left in the sea of sand. Your shadow was reflected in the spring. Someday, the oases will become the new deserts. And the deserts will also breed new oases. The only eternal thing is the legend of you. Someday, I'll follow your footprints to find your shadow. At the sleepless and wordless moment before dawn. When the song faded out, Iron Axe was back at the snowy Longsong stronghold. It seemed that nothing had happened and that everything he had experienced just now was an illusion. He swallowed hard for a while and then opened his hand. There was a tiny grain of transparent sand shining on his palm. Chapter 458, The Song of Resonance. Roland could not believe what he was hearing. You said that you saw a vast desert in Echo's song and you brought back a grain of sand? Roland asked. His mind was racing. Was this simply an auditory delusion? How, then, could he explain this speck of powder? I didn't bring it back, Your Highness. Iron Axe put the grain of sand on the desk solemnly. At the time, it rooted me in place and I never thought of checking whether it was real. This grain of sand just suddenly appeared in my hand. Maybe it was blown by the wind? It was becoming more and more implausible. Roland thought for a moment and asked, did she sing only the one song? Some other songs, too. But I couldn't understand. Absorbed in his memory, Iron Axe continued, it was like a miracle. Back in the southernmost region, if Lady Silvermoon claimed to be the three gods' emissary, I would firmly believe her. Your Highness, is it because she's evolved? This Irons and man of the Majin clan had followed Roland more than a year and now had a much better understanding of witches. I think so, but it's the first time I've seen such a situation. Roland answered. After some thought, he decided to send for Echo and ask her in person. When Iron Axe left, Roland picked up the grain of sand and looked at it carefully. Was it created by magic power? I'm not sure. Nightingale's voice came from behind. There's no trace of magic power in it. This did not necessarily mean that it was not made by magic power. It was a real thing in the real world, like Soraya's pictures. Once created, it would maintain itself without magic power and could not be affected by God's stone of retaliation. Before long, Echo came into the study. Nightingale immediately stepped out of her mist to stand beside Roland. With a smile on her face, she said, Congratulations. Echo was surprised. To me? Nightingale nodded. The magic power in you has cohered. Don't you feel it? Really? Echo shook her head in amazement. You mean my ability has evolved? Finding that things had turned out just the way he'd expected, Roland asked Nightingale, what does it look like? It's like a transparent blue gem, clear as water, Nightingale answered. She has almost as much magic power as Maggie. Echo's evolution seemed to be unrelated to enlightenment. She had condensed her magic power even before she knew it. When Roland told her what Iron Axe had experienced, she was astonished. He actually felt like he had returned to the southernmost region and was in the sea of sand? The phrase felt like maybe inaccurate. He returned with a grain of sand from the desert, Roland said with smile. Sand can be found everywhere, but I don't believe he went so far as to dig in the snow or mud for it only to deceive me. He paused a little and asked, "What did you see at the time?" "Nothing at all." Echo answered with some embarrassment, "I had my eyes closed and wasn't paying attention to my surroundings." "So how about showing us?" Roland suggested. He propped his hands on his chin, with interest. "Sing the song you created, the one about your hometown." "Here?" "Yes," he said, "dinner isn't ready for another half hour. It won't disturb anyone." "I want to hear an immersive song, too," Nightingale encouraged. Fine." Echo took a deep breath and soon a mixed sonata from a distant time resounded in the office. It was a sweet feminine voice, slightly restrained at the start. Maybe it was because she had never sung indoors. As the melody slowly soared, she became thoroughly absorbed in the music. As she was singing, Roland could hear hot winds blowing through green woods, he even felt the temperature increase. He smelled searing sands under a scorching sun. As the song faded out, he lingered lost in the aftertaste. Undoubtedly, this was a wonderful, exotic lyrical song in which a tone-deaf guy like himself could never find fault. However, he'd seen neither desert nor oasis with trickling streams. He sat still in his study the whole time. He glanced at Nightingale, who shook her head. It was apparent that she had not seen any miraculous scene either. Was it because her ability was not effective this time? Roland contemplated, and then asked Echo, "Did you write this song?" "Yes," she nodded. "Now, sing several songs I've taught you." He thought for a moment and decided, "Let everyone come and listen." Soon, the study was crowded with witches. The 3 witches from Sleeping Island had even come, too. They were still holding their cards in hand. Echo was clearly a little nervous, but with the encouragement of Nightingale, she calmed down. She sang all the songs including the gorilla song. She received warm applause from the witches without exception. After listening to the witches describe their feelings, Roland had a rough understanding of Echo's new ability. The amount the audience could be affected by her singing depended on their respective experiences. If they had the same experience as depicted in the song, they would be influenced more. He came to this conclusion based on the newer songs he'd taught to Echo. Gorilla's song was the most popular one, because the witches had seen the first army marching along to the beat of music. Therefore, they could understand this song better. This could also explain why her southernmost region song had resonated so strongly with Iron X. Unfortunately, Roland could not tell from a test that how much her singing could affect the audience. He was wondering if the scenes in her song could become real things when a listener was fully absorbed in it. Echo's new ability filled him with expectations. The ability to lift one's spirits should never be underestimated. She could encourage soldiers, pacify the masses, and sing background music for dramas. The next afternoon, Roland met Vader from Border Town in his study. Your Highness. I'm here," he said with chattered teeth. Obviously, he had not recovered from the high-speed flight. The fastest way to travel between the town and Stronghold now was Maggie's express service. However, even wrapped up in a thick blanket, flying at a speed of 60 kilometers per hour under the claws of a large beast was not a comfortable flight. "Good job," Roland patted the fat pigeon on his shoulder. "Coo," she proudly held her head up. "I want you here to assist the elk family with training," he looked at Vader and said. "The situation here is different from that in Border Town but similar to that of Valencia. Here there are rats, refugees and violent criminals." "You mean, you want me to train patrollers?" Vader asked. He had finally stopped shivering after warming himself by the fireplace. "No, I mean police." Roland explained his plan for taking severe measures against illegal and criminal activities. "The First Army will take care of it in the beginning, but public security work has to be handed over to the local police. The most important thing in training the police is to infuse them with the people's protector concept. Treat the people warmly, like a spring breeze. And punish the criminals ruthlessly, like thunder." Vader repeated what Roland had said. Yes, the prince said with a smile, I hope you can train them well. Chapter 459, Snake-Tooth, Part 1. During the months of demons, the streets and lanes in Stronghold were always desolate, and the rats here huddled themselves up, hiding in their respective evil territories. They were sharing the food that had been stored in the fall and waiting until a new prey emerged when it would warm up again. This is the way it should have been. Shit, why do I have to struggle through the snowstorm to listen to some damned policy preaching? Snake-Tooth bitterly spat on the ground. I don't give a damn what the lords will do. Put your collar up, he said to Joe, a small boy shivering next to him. You'll die if you catch the cold plague. He shouldn't have followed us out, Sunflower said, frowning. Is it really necessary to send all the four of us just to get some information? Connors must have it in for us. Save it, please. Even if he does, what can we do? Tiger Claw, a strapping boy, said with disapproval. He's our source for food. Though he sounded unconcerned, he still quickened his pace to walk in front of the other three kids. From then on, Snake-Tooth felt that the cold wind was diminishing considerably. Thanks, Joe whispered. When it came to Connors, every one of them was reluctant to say anything. Rats had social ranks too. Kings were at the top and tails at the bottom. Different ranks had different places to stay. As for Connors, he was neither a king nor a tail. He was the ruler of the endless lane in the western zone of the outer city. If he must be called something, he should be a waist or a belly. No matter what he was, Snake-Tooth and his friends had to respectfully call him boss whenever they met him. There were 6 rulers like him in the western zone, but their boss, namely the king of the western zone, still remained unknown to Snake-Tooth. Connors had several teams of rats and they were one of them. The only way to win more favor from the ruler was to show stronger competency than the other teams. Unfortunately, as street kids in the lane, they were obviously at a disadvantage in both number and strength. But Tiger Claw was different. It was incredible for him, who ate only half a piece of brown bread every day, to be so well built. The reason the brown-haired girl, Sunflower, thought that Connors was aiming at them was because of their prior mishap. They didn't take the witch that appeared in the lane to Connors because Snake-Tooth wanted to use her ability to make some money first. Not long after they went out, they unexpectedly met the big shot from the Honeysuckle family and lost the witch before they made enough money. Because of this incident, Connors was extremely angry with them. He thought if they had given the witch to him earlier, he would have made a lot more by selling her to the noble or the church. It's easy to say, Snake-Tooth said with contempt. Selling her to the church for 25 gold royals? Where can he find those priests? The church is in ruins. The nobles won't honestly give gold royals to a rat either. He'll get killed instead of getting paid. Snake-Tooth is right. Joe agreed, still shivering. If he really thought we made him lose 25 gold royals, he would have thrown us into the Redwater River. Connors could only give the witch to the king of the western zone. He also needs to protect himself from her magic power and doesn't have any god stones of retaliation. Snake-Tooth continued, he's just disgusted with us. Stop saying selling. She's paper and one of us. Sunflower gave Snake-Tooth a painful pinch. You talk about her like she's cargo. She suddenly paused a little here and asked, hey, did you sell her back then? No, I didn't. He exclaimed. I tried my best to save her, but that person is the lord of the city. Is she all right in Border Town? Tiger Claw sighed. How can she be all right? Sunflower snorted. What's the difference between being played by the prince and being played by the other noblemen? Really, you say that now, but when you actually see the noble's lifestyle, you'll desperately want to be played by them, Snake-Tooth said and twitched his lips. When they arrived at the square of Stronghold, they were taken by surprise. Several hundred people there surrounded a wooden stage and there was a bonfire. It was such a rare scene on a snowy day. Someone will actually come here to preach, Tiger Claw rasped. What kind of tricks does the noble want to play? It can't be good news. Snake-Tooth shrugged. I suppose it's about tax collection or grabbing some able-bodied guys for military service. They've just fought a battle, right? whatever, it's none of our business. Sunflower said, let's finish this quickly and get home early. Joe, go over to the bonfire and warm yourself. Yeah. Snaketooth walked around the crowd to the edge of the stage. The man on it wore a thick, cotton-padded jacket, a wool hood, and a pair of deer leather gloves. Snaketooth felt warm simply by looking at him. This was so much better than him and his dirty, old clothes. He thought of how great it would be if he had a chance to steal them, but also knew that was just in his imagination. The elk family label on the man's cloak indicated his identity. A rat could never afford to offend an attendant of the 4 families. Go with Joe to warm yourselves, I can take care of this here, Snaketooth said to the other 2 kids. Really? Tiger Claw asked and raised his eyebrow a little. Of course, I've got a good memory. Snaketooth pointed at his head. I remember everything, the words, the people, and the bitter hatred. Pfft, Sunflower scoffed. Listen to you. Since you say so, I'll go. And thanks. Let's go, Tiger Claw. But you'll have to give me more at dinner tonight. We'll see. I don't know if there's any food tonight, she said, throwing her hands up. After they left, Snaketooth patted his cold face to draw his attention back to the wooden stage. The information was useless for a rat tail like himself, but it might mean profitable opportunities for rat bellies and kings. Unfortunately, even if they did make some profits, the tails at the bottom would still get almost nothing. My fellow citizens, here's a joint declaration by the Lord of the Western Region, Prince Roland Wimbledon, Earl of the Elk Family, Shalafi Hull, and the Lord of Longsong Stronghold, Petrov Hull. The man took a sip of his hot ale and continued to read a piece of parchment in his hand. The City Hall of Longsong Stronghold now opens the grain market to the public. Any citizen who has extra grain at home can sell them in the market freely now. But pay attention please, starting next month, any unauthorized sale of grain will be considered a felony, and only the City Hall has the right to purchase and sell grain. Once someone is arrested for the unauthorized sale of grain, he'll be severely punished. The City Hall also welcomes public tip-offs about this kind of offense, and will reward anyone who offers correct information 25 silver royals. Snaketooth opened his mouth with surprise, for he never expected that he would hear such incredible news. The noble wants to forbid the private trade of grain. Besides, both the grain purchasing and selling prices offered by the City Hall are extremely low. Who'll sell grain to them at this low price? The grain price in Stronghold has already increased threefold because of the early arrival of this year's months of demons, and it's impossible to drop before the snow ends. If the City Hall sells grain now, no matter how much, the nobles and merchants will buy it all. Did the prince and the city lord never think of this issue? Wait, if they really do forbid private trade in grain, what will happen to us? Snaketooth suddenly shuddered at this thought. Most of the citizens bought most of their grain from rats. Once the policy was carried out and all the grain in the market was bought by the noble and merchants, it would be a disaster for almost everyone. Chapter 460, Snaketooth, Part 2. Snaketooth never expected that much more unbelievable things were yet to come. The speaker's next announcement rendered him motionless. In 5 days, which is the second week of the first month of spring, the City Hall will distribute rations at the square. Everyone can come here to collect 2 bowls of steaming hot oatmeal, one for lunch and one for dinner. Citizens, let's all thank the prince for his generosity. At this, the crowd began to stir. My God, Gale was right, this was really in the notice. Yes, I came just to confirm that. Do my ears deceive me? Free oatmeal every day? Are you coming, too? Don't you have plenty of oats and dried meat at home? It's still 2 free meals. My lord didn't forbid me from coming. Didn't you hear that he said everyone? My lord. Someone suddenly shouted. Is the oatmeal really free? How long will this continue? This was the question on everyone's mind. The crowd quieted and turned to look at the attendant in unison. The attendant waited for the good news to sink in, and then announced calmly, that's right. The oatmeal really is free, and the distribution will continue until the end of the months of demons. Tell all your neighbors and friends about this news, because His Highness will always stay true to his promises." Hundreds of people instantly became excited, but Snaketooth still couldn't believe his ears. Free food? What does this mean? It means that they can temporarily avoid being threatened by Kanas and starving in the snow. No, not just them, but all rats will be able to easily obtain food. Now, they'll be even more difficult to control. Kanas won't just sit by and let this happen, so what will he do? Send someone to disperse the crowd, disrupt the distribution, or bribe City Hall officials to dump all the oatmeal into the Redwater River? However, Snaketooth also noticed that the announcer kept mentioning His Highness, which meant it was the legendary Prince Roland that gave orders to distribute rations, not the Duke or the 5 families. Will he let these rats roam shamelessly, or will he really be different from the other noblemen? He didn't trust any of the noble, and the day paper was taken away was still fresh in his mind. However, a small voice in his head kept asking him, what if it was true, what if it was true? Luckily, his doubts didn't last long because the elk attendant on the stage began to read another notice. He used to think that these orders were simply the nobles' tricks to mess with the citizens and had nothing to do with orphans like him, but even more surprising than the last 2 notices was the third one, which directly applied to the rats. Citizens, listen up. There are brighter days to come. The announcer shouted something to calm the rowdy crowd and then said, in 5 days, or when the oatmeal distribution starts, His Highness will begin cracking down on crime in Longsong Stronghold, including black street organizations, theft, and any behavior that threatens the safety and belongings of the citizens. When the time came, please don't hang around Black Street or visit pubs, casinos, and other unsafe areas to prevent unnecessary harm. Order in Stronghold needs to be maintained by all citizens, and the City Hall is currently recruiting public safety officers and police personnel. Next, I'll explain the requirements. Snaketooth didn't feel like listening anymore, so he made his way out of the crowd and ran next to the bonfire. Hurry, let's go back. Are you done listening? Sunflower rubbed her hands and asked reluctantly, you should get warm before you leave. No, we have to go now, he said urgently. What happened? Joe could sense that something was off. I'll explain to you on the road. Snaketooth stomped his foot. We need to go back right now, otherwise Kanas will hear about this through someone else and we'll be done for. The gathering spot for rats in the western zone was a 2-story house buried deep in the endless lane. Kanas was an intimidating one-eyed man, and his temper and methods were just as cruel as his appearance. Snaketooth personally saw him nail someone who was messed up to a wall and then whipped him to death. At the same time, he controlled the food supply of several rat organizations in the area, so no one dared to disrespect him. Snaketooth felt the same way, so he knelt carefully in front of Kanas and told him about the notices. Is the Lord of the City targeting us? Kanas asked with a frown, what kind of nonsense is that? It's not the Lord of the City, reminded Snaketooth carefully. The announcer was talking about the prince. What the hell do you know? Kanas spat. No noble, no matter how important, can do anything in someone else's territory. This Longsong stronghold, not border town or king city, and the lords of the honeysuckles or elks are here, so there's nothing he can do. So what if he's the so-called protector of the western region? Just look at who's sitting in the castle. The king still rules Grey Castle in name, but who cares about his orders? You're right, a girl next to Kanas said softly. Not to mention, even if power changes hands, it has nothing to do with us. Nobles are nobles, and rats are rats. Just because the 2 groups live in the same city, it doesn't mean that they are anything alike. Rats are rats? That's what I love to hear. Kanas grabbed the girls behind. However, the second notice is quite strange. Usually, if the noble want to improve their reputation by distributing food, they would let us know beforehand. Also, they usually restrict the amount they distribute, but how come it sounds like they're trying to feed the entire city this time? No one could answer his question, but Snaketooth knew that everyone was thinking about those 2 free bowls of oatmeal. Maybe, the noblemen want to get on good terms with Sir Bloodyhand? The girl chuckled. Who knows? Kana shrugged. I'll go ask the boss later. Only he knows and understands these issues related to the noble. The so-called Bloody Hand was the king of the Western Zone rats, and it was rumored that he was very close with the lower-level nobles. In a sense, he was no longer a regular rat, but a title-less underground nobleman. In fact, all rat kings had similar social connections. At this thought, Snaketooth breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that Kana's lover was right. Both the noble and rats have existed for hundreds of years, so no matter how the upper level changes, the underground world will always maintain its own rules. His Highness is also a member of the noble, so what can he do? By the way, I know exactly what you all are thinking right now. Kanas chuckled. You want to try the city hall's oatmeal? On the day of distribution, everyone must remain in this room, and no one can leave. Understood? If anyone goes behind my back to eat it, I'll make sure he never eats another thing in his life.